Hey guys, what's going on? Today's video is a little bit different. Last night I had DrMickLive, a Twitch streamer and licensed therapist, on my Twitch stream to help and have a conversation and discuss about basically all the stress that's going on and ways to try and handle it, and just coping mechanisms and different kind of. It was a pretty broad conversation, but just all in all discussing mental health in the times of COVID and everything that's going on. It was a really popular discussion with the viewers. Everyone seemed to love it. We had literally hundreds of questions come in, and so I decided for today that we'll just take that and kind of unedited bring it and put it up for you guys to watch if you want. Again, this is all about basically trying to help discuss the mental health surrounding the COVID environment and ways to try and protect and help yourselves. So I hope you enjoy the video, and we'll get back to gaming next week. Let me move you around, or I'm just adjusting the source.
Oh
but
God, I'm actually
oh,
on
we can see
I'm
you.
on your screen.
You
Okay,
you
yeah,
are
you can.
there. It's like how
What
does
up,
how does
fam?
how does that make you feel? Like on a scale of 1 to weird.
On a scale of 1 to weird,
I like giving weird scales. What can I say?
let's go mixed.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
I don't know where that falls on that scale, but
At a 3, of course.
I feel like a therapist who's about to be interviewed by a guy on Twitch.
Wow. I mean, I don't see this as really an interview per se, but I guess maybe it is because
No, I mean, it's
you're
more of a
you're the subject
conversation.
expert. But yeah, I'm not really an interviewer. I don't do a lot of podcasts or talk shows or stuff like that. But so guys, if you don't know, this is Dr. Mick, and tell us a little about you as as a non-interviewer. Tell us about you.
Hi. I'm well, I'm a huge fan of zines
Oh.
for one.
Oh.
I'll start with that one. But I'm a licensed licensed marriage and family therapist. I prefer to say couple and family therapist. Marriage is a little bit limiting, but officially, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Illinois. I live in Chicago. I have a PhD in human development with a specialization in marriage and family therapy. I've been a practicing therapist for about 8 years, and as most of you know, I actually stream on Twitch as well as DrMickLive. Dr. Mick is a play on of a gamer tag that I have. My name's actually Ryan, but I stream on Twitch at horrible hours
Just
that just are totally unreasonable.
I mean,
And
you have a day job, so that makes sense.
yeah, but
know?
people show up, and I got a really cool community that likes to hang out. But I'm a huge fan of zines, and it's been really cool to get to know you over the last. I mean, really, I feel like we've actually started to get to know each other over the last couple of months.
Yeah.
But I knew of you long before you knew of me.
Oh,
And
I'm
so
sorry.
when you and I first started talking, I was like, holy shit, like he's really cool, and I'm actually talking to Z, and that's pretty cool. Like it's neat to have seen streamers and then all of a sudden now kind of like gotten to know you a little bit. But yeah, so I love talking about mental health and all that fun stuff. And Zine is fabulous at talking about mental health in the way that he talks about it. And I obviously endorse him, as all of you do, as being a wonderful human being. So
Well, okay.
that's me.
I mean, you don't have to
I'm gonna
stop
flatter the hell
if
out
you
of
just
you,
want to
man.
keep saying
Yeah,
nice things
just
about me. I'm good. Like
keep
I just
fawning over you.
perfect.
Yeah. How about it?
How
Yeah,
we
just sit back, man.
we'll bring you on every night. What
Yeah,
the hell?
I'm gonna take you on an emotional ride tonight, man.
So, how this all kind of came down, guys, is basically I noticed within myself the last week, really, maybe a little bit longer, but that I was starting to feel differently. I'm pretty introspective. I personally have dealt with and was diagnosed with chronic depression at around 14, and have dealt with it, various medications on and off, and have it very, very controlled at this point, and advocate highly, working with your doctor, whether it's GP, with a therapist, whatever you need. One of the things that I really stress with my community is that you never get rid of it, but it is controllable. You can be in charge of it. Through dealing with that and growing up with that, I became very introspective to kind of understand my emotions and my responses and why things were, so that I could try and put a rational feeling and even when I didn't have medication or just, maturity or experience helping me, I could start to understand, like, this isn't a normal feeling. So is it what I should be feeling, or is it my brain chemistry making me feel that way? Because of that, I'm pretty cognizant of my emotions and that sort of thing. So the last week or two, I just noticed like I am responding differently. I'm feeling very disassociated from life. Like as an example, on Wednesday, I started stream and I was like, "Hey guys, what's up? It's Wednesday. Thanks for coming to stream." And someone's like, "It's not Wednesday." And I had like a little existential crisis because I realized like I had no idea. Like I thought that it was, but it could have very well be. And I'm so disassociated from everything that's going on that it could have been a different day. Now it wasn't just forgetfulness. It's like that's not normal for me.
Yeah.
And so I kind of broke it all down. I was just like, you know what? There's a ton of stress. There's a ton of things going on. We are in literally unprecedented times, and that's in ways been, I think that's starting to manifest in different ways. And as the quarantine goes on, as the length that we're dealing with this goes on, I think it's only going to kind of get worse. So initially, I was going to talk to you and reach out and just be like, hey, do you have any suggestions for ways to handle this or thoughts on this? And then I was like, well, maybe that's a conversation that we can bring to this stream environment
Yeah.
and have with
Sure.
everybody to listen. So that's kind of what started this. That's why you're, my first thought. Past that, I just wanted to talk about mental health and stuff. So kind of now that we've both done our intros. Now the conversation, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
what's up? How's it
So,
going?
yeah, you wanna
have,
let's
let's talk.
maybe do
Let's
yeah.
talk about it. How have you? Have you?
You come here often?
Has your hardcore character died yet? Uh,
No,
no, you're
not
still.
yet. No, 36
What
hours in,
is that?
not dead.
Division?
Yeah.
Are you playing that from start to finish, or is it like just an ongoing thing?
Well,
I don't know
uh,
anything about the game.
so I'm a huge Destiny fan, but Destiny is total shit right now. So I started playing the Division, which is usually my backup, and they have this mode, like this hardcore mode, and I figured it would be decent for streaming because it adds a little bit of intensity to what I'm doing. So like, if you don't really care about what I'm saying and you'd rather watch the game, there's actually something interesting to watch. But yeah, if it's permadeath, so I literally have 36 hours into that character, and if I die even one time, I have to delete the character. So it's just kind of it makes my heart race a little bit
Yeah,
while I'm playing, keeps me, awake a little bit more, and that's been pretty fun for me, and I think makes for a little bit more of an interesting stream than me just dying over and over and looting stuff. So I mean, it's I played a little bit of it this morning. It was a little bit dicey at a couple times, but I haven't gotten to the scariest part yet, which is like the final battle, and then
so there is
if
a
I get through that,
like
we're
a
good.
start to finish kind of it.
Sort of like there's a conclusion when you get to level 40 and you beat the end boss, then it's just sort of like roaming around for a while. But I'm excited to see how far I can take the character just because. And then I know that it'll be a great moment and it'll probably be on highlight reel forever and whatever montage I end up making down the line of the moment I die on stream.
Ah,
I only play the character on stream now. For a while I was leveling it while I was off stream, but now I only play when I'm on stream because if I die, I want that to be
right.
immortalized so people can make fun of me forever.
I'm basically in the
So
same camp. I'm doing hardcore in Minecraft. And and not only is it just add that extra like pucker factor, frankly, I was like, oh god, but also you get the same way where it's like I can't play this not on stream because if I
yeah,
die that and I'm not showing it, like it'll be bad enough when I die, but if I don't have like I just like yeah guys,
it'd be a
so
huge loss.
I did something stupid and died, then I will never
Yep.
hear the end of it.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
now that we've settled in, gotten rid of the
Settled
nerves and
in. Yeah,
stuff like
right.
that.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
I guess you kind of like obviously I'm sure you're doing this with clients and stuff. What would you kind of start out with? Just as I
Like a
mean,
PSA,
yeah,
just, what's the overarching
yeah,
theme of
yeah,
what I might say tonight?
right.
Okay. Um, well, this is the first I'll give a little bit of context. This is actually the first time in the 8 years that I've been doing therapy where I've done therapy in Illinois, Virginia, and Las Vegas. So I've had kind of like some variety in terms of the context that I've worked in as a therapist and just all sorts of different types of clients and presenting problems and stuff. The This is the first time in my entire career that literally everybody is talking about the same thing and is affected by the same thing. And it's wild. because what happens is like a lot of times, like, you know how you're saying the days kind of blend together?
Mhm.
Sessions sort of blend together a little bit for me too, because it's like we're all talking about it and people are at different markers with this and how they're handing it and how like the way it's affecting them. And something that I've learned about this and speaking, you're saying, I heard you say before I came on that you're like, we're all affected by this and that you think it'd be even weirder if somebody wasn't affected by this.
Yeah.
And I agree. Like, I mean, we are all affected by this. And one of the things that I've seen so many people struggling with is this idea that is the way that I'm affected by this legitimate or not? And like all this questioning of the way in which a person is affected by this. And we're all affected by it. It's not a competition to determine who's more affected by it or less affected by it. We all just are. And that is okay. And we can hold space for all of that. There are people who do have it worse. There are people who have it better, but the way it's affecting you matters. And so if you can acknowledge the way in which it's impacting you and have an understanding of that, it opens you up to be able to make some of those better choices in terms of like what's going to be in your best interest and for your better health. And people that deny the way that it's affecting them, it ends up spilling out the sides in ways that they aren't anticipating. And leads to maybe certain decisions that actually end up being more destructive rather than coping with it successfully. And this is a time where people's anxiety is going to go up. Thank God. I mean, I specialize in working with severe and debilitating anxiety, so this is really in my wheelhouse clinically. But like th- the general uptick in anxiety is normal and is to be expected, even just from like a brain point right now. And so like we're all collectively experiencing it, which also has a tendency to sort of raise the water up so that people are feeling that collective sense. Some people feel less, but there's a lot of people feeling more, and that's okay. Anxiety is not a bad thing. It just is. And people sometimes struggle when I say that.
Right.
But
We tend to want to fight against it, but
mhm.
the anxiety is based isn't it based, I mean, I guess theorized, but isn't it basically an evolutionary response to a negative, like, as a survival thing? Isn't that
Yep.
I
It's a risk mitigating emotion. So the
Oh,
way that your
the
brain
big words.
there, I'll hit you with some big words tonight. So like what happens is if you think back from an evolutionary standpoint, back when we were not fully developed in terms of our prefrontal cortex, which is where all of our rationality sits, uncertainty equals risk. So if you didn't know what to anticipate, if you didn't know what was coming, it meant that it could be dangerous, that you could be in trouble. And so your brain sends a physiological response to you that basically says, you need to do whatever you need to do to get the hell out of the way of what could happen to you. It's not I am in danger necessarily so much as it is I could be in danger. Anxiety tends to be more anticipatory than it is sort of like in the present moment response. Usually that then becomes fear. So all your brain's trying to do when you're experiencing anxiety is protect you and get you to do something in order to get away from the anxiety or to get away from the perceived risk or to find reassurance that you're okay. The problem is now that we have a prefrontal cortex that's capable of developing a whole bunch of abstract ideas of what could happen and can anticipate a million steps ahead, anxiety can go completely off the rails sometimes because we basically can talk ourselves into more anxiety as the result of like what we're constructing in our minds. So all you're trying to do, if any of you in chat are experiencing anxiety, it's just your brain trying to protect you from what is potentially risk, and that risk sits in uncertainty. And there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We're all having to sit with a shitload of it. We all want answers. We want to have nice, clean corners 90 degrees that we can anticipate and fit through and boom, and we don't have that right now, and it sends a lot of people into a spiral. So yeah, risk mitigating emotion is the way that I like to describe it. It's there
uh,
to protect you.
that like I was just like, okay, let me think about this for a half hour. Hold on, because as you were talking about that, I was, it kind of steps away from the COVID and that overarching, but just how you were describing that made me like kind of make connections in terms of why it is, and I joked about this earlier, but why it is that we instead of we stay in a poor situation rather than going out of our way to fix it and change it and to try and improve it, because we, even though we're in a poor situation, if I'm understanding right, you're saying our brain's basically saying, I know this, and so there's a comfort in this. Even if I'm unhappy here, it's still more comfortable, or presumably more comfortable and less anxious than taking changes and trying to improve or adjust our life to resolve that poor situation, whatever that may be. Am I kind of on the right mindset there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're talking about two things at once, which is totally okay. I'm going to sort of separate them for a second.
Okay. You
Which is,
separate them for me.
I will just, we'll
Just
just cleave it in two a
oh,
little bit here,
cleave.
okay? Um, so for a lot of people, they who experience chronic anxiety, one of the things that's been fascinating about talking to clients or people in general that run on a higher baseline of anxiety is that they have been relatively unfazed by the anxiety of this because they are so used to running at a higher baseline of anxiety. So it's not that they're, okay with it, but that like like there's physiological arousal just has not gone up because they're like, yeah, I'm used to this. I live on a baseline of experiencing a ton of anxiety on the day to day. And so the anxiety of this, yeah, just throw it in the pile because I got enough shit that I'm already worried about. And what that is in some ways is that, and I talk about this a lot, you've heard me say this, but I'm going to repeat it, is there's when we build expectations of the world and of ourselves and of our experience, we look for ways to fit our experience into those expectations. And so if you expect that you are going to stay complacent, that you're going to be debilitated in terms of your anxiety, that you aren't going to find ways to cope with this, that this is going to destroy you, that you are going to just go crazy, and that becomes the expectation of what's going to happen. Any experience you have or decision you make that violates that expectation is actually going to raise your anxiety. So this is what makes change hard sometimes, is because if I have an expectation that I'm an anxious person and then I start doing something new and I respond to the environment and the inputs in the environment in a different way, and I don't experience the uptick in anxiety and it doesn't align with my expectation of myself as an anxious person, you'll then get anxious because your brain can't handle the distance of that. It's why a lot of times people with depression will hold depression as almost part of their identity, because you get so used to what it is to be depressed that the idea that you would no longer be depressed or that you would manage it in such a way that it wouldn't touch you in the way that you're used to it is hard for people to wrap their heads around, and will sometimes say, you know what? I'm actually okay being depressed because at least I know what to expect. We
Mhm.
like when we know what to expect. I know that when I'm depressed, I'm going to be laying in bed, and that I'm going to stay in bed, and that I'm not going to get anything done, and that I'm going to, whatever it might be. And at least I know what's going to happen when I do that. The idea that I might get out of bed and still go do something or engage in some kind of new activity or coping mechanism, despite the fact that I'm depressed, I can't really wrap my head around that, and I don't expect that, and that's too hard for me. And so if I did that, it's not going to align with what I expect. And now all of a sudden, I have to anticipate things that I never had to anticipate before, and now that makes me anxious. And oh my god, now I'm having to deal with anxiety. Are you kidding me? Okay, no, I'm going to go back. So that's all a really long way of saying that, like, the way you build your expectations of yourself amidst all of this, pandemic and however you're handling it is going to sort of lead you in a certain direction, which is to say that you really ought to consider what your expectations are of yourself in this moment, because you can then look for data and experiences that align with that better expectation of yourself.
Okay.
So I don't know if that was too
No,
far
I
of a split off of what you had said,
no,
but
no, no. I mean, and again, I expect tonight to be wide ranging. So, but and that's interesting because it's one of the things that I've talked about. Again, is I'm not a therapist, so I don't necessarily know all the low level details. But I have grown up with depression, and I recognize it pretty quickly, and know
mhm.
a lot of it. And one of the interesting things for me is depression has always been like it's insidious in that how the different ways that it's almost intelligent to me in how it perpetuates itself within someone's mind. A
Yes.
depressed person like you want to stay depressed, and it
Mhm.
makes you kind of feel, and I think that it kind of ties in there. But for me, less of the explanation of why, but just in the living it day to day, is you have your depressed set of music that you listen to that make you feel shitty music. I feel bad, and so I turn on this music because it always makes me feel better. But the reality is it's your wallowing music. It lets you wallow in your depression. It lets you
Yeah.
sit there and feel shitty because you have that association. And there's songs that I have only started really to be able to appreciate again because I realized that as much as I love those songs, they were my I'm depressed songs, and putting them on helps me to feel depressed. And when you're not feeling happy, you want to lie in bed and tell yourself how big of a piece of shit you are and how horrible everything is, and you want to replay
Yep.
everything, like all those things and those behaviors, which is it always is amazing to me that it's like this is a chemical imbalance that's causing this entire almost disease that's actively trying to hurt you, and yet it's primarily chemicals. But
Yep.
so it's interesting to hear kind of that next step from what I've observed and what I've kind of put together, and go down to how in the brain that's actually happening and so that sort of thing. um so I guess
Well,
go ahead.
depression loves validation. Like, if you
Yes.
wanna kind of use externalized language of that, which there I'll use a little bit of a clinical term here, is like the way that you even talked about depression here is this idea that depression is this external force that is affecting you.
Mhm.
So it's like person first language, right? So rather than being like, I'm depressed, it's I'm a person with depression.
Mhm.
And there's that the externalization of that, usually the effort of doing something like that in and of itself is to empower a person to be able to look at the depression as something that they are empowered to fight against or to work with or to, in some ways, I mean, ally with to understand why it's there.
Right, that introspection that I
And
was talking about of figuring
of
out
course,
where and why, and wait, this isn't me responding, this is the depression responding.
right. Depression is set a baseline for me. And unfortunately, depression is like, you know, anxiety wants to be acknowledged. Depression wants to be validated. Is sort of a delineation I make of those two
Hmm.
things. Like, so depression oftentimes what will happen is you will depressed people tend to enjoy the company of other depressed people in some ways because it like kind of holds itself in place. And depression likes it when you lay in bed and acknowledge that it's there. Depression likes when you don't take a shower. Depression likes when you listen to sad music and sort of wallow in it because it validates that it's there. And then as a result, it will sort of fight against the idea that you could be validated for anything else other than that. Like, at its worst, chronic depression is something that's like this giant, like this wet blanket that a person's just wearing around all the time. And it just wants to be like, hey, see me. I'm here. I want everybody to see me. And we sometimes, I- in my clinical experience, I see people get to the point where they will indulge that validation, not out of some space of like, I want to be depressed or feel sorry for me or anything like that, but it's just like it's such a loud voice that says like, come here. Like, I'll get to a point where I'll make you think that I'm protecting you, that I'm here for you, I'm reliable. And it can be pretty seductive in that way.
Hmm.
Not to say that like it's a person's fault for being depressed. Depression, absolutely, we know, is related to chemical imbalances and is a biological thing that happens that has behavioral manifestations. But also, people do make decisions that can hold depression in place or, in fact, make it worse. And that's the part that I generally am working with people on.
Yeah, that's I mean, I repeat it a lot because I walk a line that makes me a little uncomfortable, but at the same time I want to be as helpful as I can. But that I'm not a therapist and I don't try and give myself as one. But I have a lot of people that talk to me, and I'm happy to have this conversation with them. And that's one of the things that I end up challenging them a lot on is their behaviors that they do to self perpetuate with themselves. So I mean, oftentimes it's kind of well, you're feeling this, but you're not actually doing anything to fix it, are you? And they're like, no, no, I'm fight against it every day. And I'm like, okay, but you're doing this and you're doing it. So holding accountable to kind of
Hmm.
the self perpetuating behaviors is one of the things that I kind of look for when I'm talking to someone.
It's a good
But
thing to look for.
it's interesting. You talked about how do you put it? Depression wants validation.
Validation.
Anxiety wants acknowledgement.
Hmm.
And see, I have am someone who I really don't deal with a ton of anxiety. That's never been a thing for me. And it's interesting because they are so close, and yet I have a really hard time. I'm getting to the point where I've talked to enough people that I'm starting to kind of empathize and know how to help and talk a little bit, but or I guess more in that case, sympathize because I don't actually feel those feelings myself. But it is interesting just how close they are, and yet they can be very dissimilar in the ways that you approach them and the things that can help. And I saw someone in chat mention they deal with both, and that just seems like a 1-2 knockout punch. That's just I'm sure brutal
Brutal.
to kind of go with. Also,
Mhm.
guys, just real quick, I did set the read my message chat reward as being really low. It's only 100 points now. If you want to try and get something to me, I have that up on a screen. So,
I can
um,
see chat too, by the
okay,
way,
okay,
which is helpful too. So if people ping you
yeah, you can.
and you
You're
want to
welcome
buy
to.
attention on something,
I
let me know.
I'm not being able to follow chat quite as well, so that's probably the best way to get to me. If it sounds like Ryan's kind of keeping an eye out.
Yeah,
Um,
if people tag me,
yeah.
I can see it too. So just
Okay.
to know. By the way, along what you were just saying, and maybe this will be helpful, as it is maybe one way to look at the difference in some ways between anxiety and depression, because they are so similar and they can manifest so similarly behaviorally, um, is if you look at how realistic a person is being. Now, that's a tricky word for me to use because it sort of suggests that there's some like capital T truth out there. And I don't want to get into the whole like philosophy of all of that.
Oh yeah.
But people who are depressed, there are actually studies that have shown this, that people who are depressed actually sit closer to perceiving reality than people who are not depressed. Like the world is somewhat of a depressing place, and sort of like if I'm not going to go full nihilism on this in terms of like nothing matters, but like
Guys, we're
depressive.
here to make you feel better. It
Yeah,
is a depressing shit place, but don't worry, we'll make you feel good by the end of it because we have porn and the internet and games. So, there's still good out there. Anyway,
that's
go
right.
on. Sorry.
That's exactly right. That's why we play Minecraft and Division and all these sorts of things. But they do. They will sort of look at a situation and they will look at it with more realistic expectations. Anxiety, on the other hand, tends to be bred in the modern day from more of a unrealistic view of things, or a extreme version of a what a realistic scenario could be. So it's sort of like this anticipation of things that maybe aren't even logically going to happen, but that you sort of like sit in that space of like anticipating things that may or may not happen. But depression is going to be more of like an attention to the reality of something and looking at it in more of like a realistic frame. Whereas anxiety is either going to take it way off the rails or take it way out into left field. And that's sometimes a way I, as the therapist, when I'm doing an assessment and I'm listening to people talk about what's going on for them and how they're perceiving different things, as part of my assessment is listening for those cues of where they're at. Another quick one is sometimes the way to be able to tell a difference between depression and anxiety is with sleep. With anxiety, it's often hard to fall asleep, but once you do, you stay asleep. With depression, it's easy to fall asleep, but you have a hard time staying asleep. It doesn't mean that you're depressed if you fall into that space, or anxious if you fall in the other space, but that's part of an assessment tool too, to look at a person's sleep and how they're being affected by that in order to tell the difference.
Okay, cool. Dirty Luke saying, I've been diagnosed with bipolar. Just remember that when I was going through the worst times of my life, I was afraid of going out and trying to get better because depression and psychosis become normal to me. And I was afraid of change. Now you're doing 100% better. You get deathly anxious when you think about going back to that state. It's a little bit of, I mean, I don't know, irony is not the right word, but getting anxious about being anxious is, a little self perpetuating. But I'm
That's how
glad that
panic attacks happen.
I'm glad you're doing better there. Um, Couple of years ago, you found out your freakouts were actually anxiety attacks, and and I had no idea it was actually anxiety. My parents didn't teach me about mental health. That's one of the reasons that we're like, I think Dr. Mick and
Hmm.
myself and stuff like that, we try and talk about that is because people have this stigma, like, if you're depressed, then have you just tried not being sad, and or not even recognizing what's going on. One of the things that I like to go to is there's a comic out there that shows if we treated physical health the same way that we treat mental health. And it shows a bunch of situations, someone with a broken arm, and the doctor's there saying, "Well, have you tried not having it be broken?" And someone who's like been shot and is bleeding, and a person standing over them saying, "Have you considered that you're just not trying hard enough?" That sort of thing. Like, and it really kind of drives home, like, these mental health is at least in terms of depression, and I don't know about anxiety, but for myself and depression, what I focus on, it's chemicals, it's physiology. It's not,
Mhm.
boy, you just don't have enough gumption to go out and feel better for the
Yeah.
day. It's like,
Go get them, sport.
yeah, yeah. Dear diabetic, why do you, instead of needing insulin, why not just not need it and just try harder? Just try and make more
Yeah,
insulin.
just tell your
Yeah,
just tell your pancreas to do its job. Come
yeah.
on now. Yeah.
Because we are all actively in control of our serotonin levels in our head. Yeah, it doesn't quite work that way.
It's amazing to me that we will legitimize just about any illness except for the ones that happen with the brain. The brain is like the most important organ you've got in terms of like how it shapes like who you are and whatnot. And yet we will question people's brains because of some weird notion about like the about consciousness and like how that works, that somehow like you can manipulate your own brain. Like you have a chemical imbalance in your liver that makes it so that it doesn't filter alcohol. People will take that very seriously. If you have if you have a gallstones or if you have kidney stones or whatever, we'll put you on dialysis if you have issues. But like if God forbid your brain have something that's affecting it to where there's some behavioral manifestation of it or some way it affects you, like no, you're just making that up. It blows my mind that we view it that way. I mean, and it's you see it on so many levels. You see it at the level of even insurance, and I'm not going to go into the shit show that is American insurance,
Yeah.
but like but when
I-
I go to look up a person's insurance benefits so that I know for me like kind of how it's going to be billed and what's going to go on for them and what their benefits are, mental health is its own separate category. So it's not like it doesn't get included within whole health. You have to click a separate button in order to go and see what a person's mental health coverage is. And a lot of times there are limitations on that that you don't see for other types of coverages. And that to me is just such a indication of the way that we, in a widespread way, look at mental health as this thing that is separate and is somehow less than. And it's too hard for me to get on board with that.
yeah.
Just as a person, not even as a therapist. Like
We're-
we're all affected by mental health. Some of us just have it worse than others.
Well, and I mean, the other thing is, people seem to forget that, evolutionarily speaking, our brains and our biology is not designed to handle the world that we have created for ourselves. We have
No.
we have we have far exceeded with our world and technology,
Yeah.
anything close to resembling what our minds, are evolved to do. And that's great that we have those advancements, but certain things aren't keeping up, like say mental health and that sort of thing. Like, just
That's
think of
right.
how much more, granted, we don't have to worry about if a tiger is going to eat us tomorrow, or most of us. So there's some comfort in that. Now someone in chat's going, "Oh great, now I'm anxious about that too." But at the same time, like, I think that there were quite a few different and less varied stresses than we've managed to create in our fast-paced world and all of our times and stuff like that. So,
You should theoretically be infinitely more terrified of cars
oh
than snakes.
yes.
And we aren't for that very reason because evolution hasn't had a chance to catch up with our brain at
Yeah,
this point.
evolution says like, well, this is normal, so it's okay, and it's like, no, cars are dangerous as hell, and and you should be scared of it. But no, that's snake.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think people being afraid of spiders is one thing that, again, it's a very common phobia, and you shouldn't feel bad if you have it or anything like that. But
Right. Of course not.
I always like kind of, one of the things I'm like, can you imagine like Godzilla walking around stomping and then looking down and seeing a human being like, ah, oh god, it's a human, oh god, and like squealing and jumping on a chair or a mountain or something, because that's the scale that we're talking there.
It's true.
It's like Godzilla,
So
like,
true.
holy shit, and it just cracks me up. Our brains are not good with current times and current life, and so that's where some of this comes from.
That's
Um,
a beautiful analogy,
I
man. Oh my god.
my dad, like, just communicating with my dad, I don't know what it was, but something about our the way we communicated back and forth is he understood things a lot better in analogies, and I've found that it's a really good way to bridge different
It is.
vocabularies, different thought processes, and stuff like that. So a lot of my communication that I try and do with concepts is to find an analogy to kind of be like, it's like this, and that's again, uh, adjusting the chemicals in your brain. It's like asking someone diabetic, why not just have your pancreas make more insulin? Kind of just try and find things that people can relate to or understand a little bit more, so that then the concept becomes familiar to them.
Helps you create lovely abstract connections that then develop a sense of empathy. Like there's a lot of people that if you can connect, metaphors are huge in therapy. I use them a lot, and I know a lot of therapists that do for that very reason. It can help people find a connection with a more complex concept in a way that they can understand and thus take with them. So I'm all for it, man. Like metaphors are the best. Analogies are great.
I'm sorry I
And
made you spit water through your nose, Hutch, but I'm glad
oh
I
my
got a
god,
laugh out of you.
that was excellent, man. If you'd have told me we were going to talk about Godzilla being terrified of a human today as some kind of analogy,
You had a hard time picturing it, but I feel like it's pretty apt.
I'd have brought beer instead of bubbly, man.
Hey, if you want to go grab one, feel free. Actually, I might need to grab some water. My throat's getting a little scratchy. But Wafflenator wants to know, how do you reach out to someone if you think there's something wrong with you? I feel like that's probably one that you've handled and heard before. So,
How do you
how
reach out to
I think
somebody?
I think they're saying that they feel like, hey, I think something, like, I might not be right. I don't know. I have questions, but I don't feel like I'm normal. I don't feel like I'm correct. Who would I like? How would I reach out to a therapist, or how would I go about that process? Like, starting out to kind of identify, is what I'm feeling normal or not? And I'm extrapolating a lot, so feel free to correct me.
No,
But
that's
I think that's the interpretation. There is, how do I know? Is there something wrong with me? Basically, in
I
which,
hate the word normal. I really
well,
do.
fair
Um,
enough, but
no, I get it. Which I no, I get it. I get why we use the word, but I hate the word normal. Here's the thing: like, you could go talk to a therapist for any reason. It doesn't have to be because you're outside of some sort of normal spectrum or because you are weird or because you're affected significantly or like highly distressed by something. You could be feeling totally great in your life right now and go see a therapist and talk about stuff. Maybe just as a buffer for if shit hits the fan, then at least you've got a good connection with a therapist that you trust at that point that can walk you through the difficult thing. The thing that I would say is like if whatever a person is experiencing to them is distressing and that is something that you experience as distressing on a regular enough of an interval and the people around you don't seem to have the ability to help because they're just not either credentialed or they don't have the ability to like really handle that very well. At that point, yeah, let's talk about finding a therapist. Now, what type of therapist to see? um, that can be sometimes hard for people to figure out. If you're thinking about medication, you're gonna have to go psychiatrist. But if you're talking relationships, marriage and family therapist, though we see individuals too. Um, psychologist is going to be good. You can get a psychological assessment if that's something that's important to you to see if there's some sort of diagnosis that fits. I will tell you that you probably don't do yourself much of a service to go into a therapist and say, "Hey, I'm pretty sure I have bipolar. Can you confirm that for me?" It's generally like, "Hey, I've been really experiencing some distress. I've seen some things that indicate it could maybe be that, but I don't know, and I'm wondering if you could work with me to figure out what might be going on for me." It's the better way to go about it. Um, I'll do a little bit of a plug if you don't mind, Zine. Like,
go for it.
I do a segment on my stream called "Find Me a Therapist," where I try to do it once a month. Maybe I'll end up doing it more because it's pretty popular, but I actually help people do that. Finding a therapist is really daunting, and so I love the question because I think it's really important for people to realize like finding a therapist isn't easy, and sometimes people think that it is and that it should be, and it isn't. There's a lot of therapists out there. It's hard to know if a person's going to fit. So I do that segment to help show people what you should look for in profiles and how to go about that process. But the most important thing is the relationship you have with that therapist, and you are not locked into a therapist if you start to see them and they don't work for you. Like you are the consumer of your therapy. Find a different therapist, ask for a referral, do what you got to do to find a therapist who's going to work for you. Don't stay with a therapist that you don't want to see because you feel like you have to because they're the one you chose. That's the best piece of advice I could possibly give as it relates to that. But you don't have to be outside the range of normal in order to find a therapist. And I can't emphasize that enough. And I know that there's like financial reasons why people can't afford it and stuff, but there's
Sure.
affordable therapy out there. if you look hard enough for it. But therapy can be scary to find in the first place. So
Yeah.
I hope that answers it. But
I've been through a few different therapists in my time, and I'm mostly I mean, I've done more of the counseling side. I don't know how much you differentiate between the two. Like I mean, obviously, I don't think counselors specifically have a doctorate and have gone to that level. But I don't know, if you're like, oh, those guys, if you're up and above, or if
oh
it's
no,
just
counselors are cool.
yeah, okay,
I'm
um,
cool with protected terms.
okay.
As the people in my stream know, I hate on life coaches really hardcore in my stream.
I'm
Like
not. Yeah.
I'm
Nope. I'm with you.
I don't even want to go there because I'll get angry. But like but anything that's a protected term, licensed mental health counselor, licensed clinical psychologist, licensed marriage and family therapist, a psychiatrist, those types of practices that are regulated, have an ethical code, have a state board, those are where you want to go. You do not want to go to a life coach. Yes, there are okay life coaches out there. I recognize that, but
Just
way more bad. You're taking too much of a risk with your mental health if you
right.
go that direction.
Just to clarify, protected term, I think in this context is they're credentialed in some way. They have to go through a board review or something in order to have
Correct.
earned that title.
Correct. I had to go through education and I had to go through a licensure exam. I had to go through 2,000 hours of therapy. I had to do a whole bunch of shit before the state was said to me, hey, yeah, you can go practice on your own and actually help people with their mental health. It's a
Right.
rigorous process. It's not just like, hey, guys, hi, I'm Ryan. And, I was talking to this guy, Zine, and me and Zine thought it'd be really cool that, like, if you talk to us, like, about whatever you want, we'll give you some really sweet advice. You can pay me $150 an hour and like I'll give you the best advice ever. And it's totally from my life experience because my life experience captures all of what it
My
is to be
life is
human. And
awesome.
I'm ready. And like,
Oh,
so come on. I'll tell you some traumatic shit and you'll think it works because you trust that I have some sort of authority because I call myself this. Okay, I'm going
right.
down the soapbox.
Yeah.
I don't want to get down the soapbox.
Yeah, I feel you. I'm in the same way. I've seen and that's one of the things that, I've talked about. I'm always a little concerned of walking that line of like this is what I can do and I have a lot of experience, but I am not that therapist is because I've seen people that, I mean, and even on Twitch that are like, I've dealt with this, so here let me tell you, and be your guide on how to do this. And it's like there's a line there where it's the I have experience and I can talk to you about my experiences and I can help you, try and look at things a different way, but I ain't your doctor.
Right.
So
The more credentialed a person is, the less they can say.
right.
Like, so just be mindful of that. That like, there's a lot of questions I never answer when I'm on stream, or I have to be very limited with my answer on because it's not ethical for me to give an answer. If you're a person who can, the less credentialed you are, the louder you can be, and the more advice you can give. And there's something kind of crazy about that, but it just sort of is what it is.
Yeah.
Um,
They,
I saw a question in chat
okay.
about the difference between bipolar depression and chronic depression, and that's a pretty easy one for me to answer. Uh, Bipolar depression is contrasted with periods of mania, whether it's hypomania or just straight up mania, whereas chronic depression is generally not going to have manic episodes that are spanned between them. So if you're a person that ever has manic episodes that span a certain amount of time, usually it's several months or sometimes it's acute, that's generally going to be contrasted as bipolar depression, whereas chronic depression is sort of like a baseline depression over time where you don't even hit hypomania, you're just sort of always depressed.
And
I saw that question. Thought it was kind of
yeah, no, it's an
interesting because
interesting
yeah, I
question.
get asked that a lot.
One of the One of the things that I think, just adding to that though, is I think people frequently, because depression is typically interpreted as, feeling sad and that sort of thing. People think mania is feeling great and feeling
Oh,
all that, and mania isn't necessarily that. I mean, it's hard to describe manic, but it's an energy. It's you're out doing stuff and you're not thinking about consequences. You're just like you feel like you could do anything, but not necessarily. It's not a boy, I feel happy sometimes and I feel sad sometimes. It's manic is this whole other thing that it's like either you deal with it and you kind of know it, or you be glad you don't have to deal with it, because mania, like depression sucks, but mania, that's terrifying for me. Like just the fact that, like, and to take it to an extreme, but it's like you could go out and hurt someone, or cheat on someone, or do extreme things that you wouldn't normally do, but you're in this middle of this episode of whatever it
yep.
is and your brain's just firing like, let's go do it kind of thing. And it's not just happiness, because people think
Oh
bipolar is
man,
happy and sad. That's not it at all.
it's not. Mania is mania is often described with people with bipolar 1 is where like the real manic episodes happen. Am I frozen?
You're
Am I cutting in and out?
Discord's doing the thing. We're going robot a little bit. Let me
All right. Should we disconnect and restart?
No, I can fiddle with things real quick. That's me. Let me pop you out, and then I might change what server we're connected to because we're on US West. US West is such a pain in the butt. Hang on real quick.
There we go.
All
US
right.
Central.
And
Oh, that's better.
now we're on Central. Bring you back. And see, perfect. Except it doesn't look perfect. There we go. All right.
Ah,
You good?
there we go. Okay,
All right.
yeah, we're good.
All right.
Yeah, no. So what you were saying about mania in bipolar is most people would describe. So people with bipolar 1, which is the one where it has like full manic episodes. Bipolar 2 is hypomanic, which means that you don't get quite as high. Usually describe it as being like on just an extended, like it's like being on cocaine. It's like you are just strung out, like you don't sleep. You have these grandiose thoughts. You do really destructive stuff. You spend a lot of money that you really shouldn't spend. You have terrible boundaries. Like it's amazing the things people will do. They're manic, and they will often describe that as feeling way worse. It's part of why the crash happens because mania is not sustainable at all in the way that depression is. It's not. Now, sometimes people will say it's amazing because I'm productive and I'm really proud of how productive I am while I'm in a manic episode, but it's generally miserable, especially for the people around a person going through mania. It can be, it's way more socially acceptable and reinforced for people to be depressed than it is to be manic because mania is a moving target. And it's really hard to handle people when they are going through manic episodes. So, yeah, it's not happiness. That's, yeah, it's a huge misconception. Bipolar is miserable.
Yeah.
So are most mental health
Yeah.
diagnoses. They're not fun to have. They're not like, it's not a badge of honor. It's not like a, oh my god, like I just would love to have depression someday. Like it just
Oh
isn't.
my God, I'm so OCD.
Oh my god. Oh, don't even get me started on that one.
Oh, I
OCD is one of the
poke,
most
poke,
debilitating
poke,
things a
poke.
person can have. Oh my god, it's something I work with a lot, and have had a lot of success working with people with debilitating OCD, and it is a miserable experience to have OCD. It's not at all the way that people sort of minimize it to be
It's
in
not preferring
popular
things to be
media.
lined up
It
on a
is
desk. That's
horrible. It is real, like truly. I wouldn't wish OCD on my worst enemy. It is a truly debilitating spiral that
right.
people get into. Really brutal stuff.
So to kind of come back a little bit to COVID and what's going on, I
Yeah,
guess, um, and then I think we'll try and get through some of these questions because we'll be here for hours if we try and
I
get. So
know
I
a lot of them.
apologize, guys, if we don't get this stuff. Like there's a lot going on, a lot of conversation, which is awesome. But I
The
guess
problem is I'll never be able to come back. Like this is it.
this
This
is
is the
it.
one. This is our one
This
shot
is our
ticket.
and we will wait. Hold on, we might be able to do this another time. Whoa, but
You know what would be cool is if sometime we did this while we were playing Dead by Daylight. Have you ever thought about that?
yeah, but then I'm too busy killing you and just absolutely
I love
utterly
being
kicking your
murdered while I talk
ass.
about how
Just
debilitating mental health
utterly
is.
destroying you and being so much better than you. So it's a little offsetting there,
The
right?
psychology of Zine is Michael Myers. Yeah.
Oh wow, wow. But to again to kind of come back, um, I've been feeling stress. I'm sure that, and I've seen a lot of people like I've been contacted by a lot of people that I talk to normally, and they're just like, wow, I'm really struggling. I think everybody's struggling a little bit. So what are
Yeah.
I guess there's no there's no bulletproof solution or anything like that. But what are some ways that people can try and that you would suggest to try and cope, to try and help us recognize that these are fear responses, and how do we handle them, whether it's subduing the anxiety, whether it's avoiding falling into depression. I mean, again, I realize that those are grandiose concepts, but in a bite-size portion, are there things that we can be doing to try and protect or help ourselves with everything that's going on?
Yes. Um, I'm going to give the cliche one first, which is focus on what you can control. And we hear that a lot. Like you probably have heard more than just me say that. I'm sure everybody in here has heard more than just me say that. But there is a reason why people are saying that. Um, it's really easy for us mentally to sit in The past and the future. Like those are less of a moving target. They don't move quite as quickly as the present does. So a lot of times we will sit in the anticipation. And there's a lot of people right now that are sitting in this space, myself included at various points in times. I mean, it's a normal thing of like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And will I be ready? We all want to be ready for what could possibly happen. And and it's okay to think about that, but sometimes people start to really focus on that in a way that's actually problematic because right now we're in a space where we don't know what's going to happen. Like we really don't know. The best answer that anybody is giving you right now is the we don't know answer. And that's really hard for people to sit with. That brings in the uncertainty that we were talking about earlier. So people are looking for answers. The reason this whole stupid ass 5G thing is going around is because people are looking for answers. So that's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say
Ah,
about that.
yeah.
But there is an actual reason why people are going in that direction. And it's because people want answers. They want certainty right now. So if you live out in the future right now, there's two things that it does. One, it's going to jack your anticipatory anxiety to a point where it's going to feel like it's debilitating and it's going to affect you in the here and now. And two, it's going to take you away from paying attention to what you actually can control in the moment, which is what you choose to do to cope, no, like engaging in healthy behaviors, monitoring what it is that you're eating, how much you're sleeping, who you're engaging with, are you staying in, all these types of things that in the here and now you actually have the ability to control. How often are you washing your hands? Are you maintaining social distance in the way that you're supposed to? Are you being careful when you go to work? Those types, like if you're still going to work, those types of things, what you can control in the here and now is super important. It gives you a sense of agency. And the cool thing about it is if you focus on what's happening right now and the decisions you're making right now that will impact the future, theoretically in a good way, because no matter what you draw up in the future is what you're going to do, it has to start with a decision you make now. So focusing on the present and engaging in what I guess if you want to call it the technical term of selective focus of if you notice that you are moving in the direction of lamenting decisions you might have made leading up to the pandemic that may have made it rough for you, or if you're thinking about what could happen in the or may or may not happen in the future, to realize that that is you making a decision to go in that direction and that that means that you can make the decision to bring yourself back to the present and focus on the things that you actually can um, control in the here and now and the things. So eat well, right? Like eat on regular intervals. Engage with people as best you can. One of the things that I've been recommending a lot for people that are working from home and have to stare at the same computer screen all the time right now is move your computer to different spots based on what it is that you're doing. So if you need to set up a makeshift office in your kitchen so that you're doing your work in your kitchen with your computer, you can compartmentalize your work as existing in that space of your house as a way to give you space to do your leisure activities in another space. If you don't have the ability to do that, me being part of that, like I do basically everything I do in this little corner of my apartment, is make that space as comforting and ergonomic of a space as you possibly can so that you're not at odds with the space that you're having to occupy right now. But really, like, there's a reason in some ways why it's a lot more nice for your mental health to actually go to an office building because it gives your brain something to compartmentalize of like work happens over here, and then when I come home there's a different set of expectations when I'm here. Those are getting blurred, and that's causing a lot of anxiety for people. So in the ways that you can micromanage that in your home, I recommend that a lot for people to do. um, if you need to set boundaries with the people you live with and come up with a system of how you can have some alone time, if it means like you have, I only have one bedroom in my apartment, if it means that one of us needs to go occupy the bedroom so that we can be away from each other for a little bit, having a system, communicating very directly with each other about, hey, what are the things we're learning about that are driving each other crazy so that we might be able to think about that in a more of a casual, like lighthearted way instead of like, I'm attacking your character because you do these things. But more of like, hey, did you know, like, let's all just have a conversation about what we do that drives each other nuts so that we can like figure out how to not drive each other nuts because we're stuck in the house with each other for a lot longer than we thought we were going to be.
Mhm.
There's ways to have those conversations that we often think are way too heavy and way too personal in lighthearted ways that can actually function to create a better space for everybody. So those are some of the ones that come directly to mind off the top of my head, of things that you can do in the here and now to make your life a little bit easier, as best you can, and to recognize that you are going to be anxious in whatever way it is, or you are going to be affected by this, and that is not a problem. That is how it is. Um, and if you think that you shouldn't be, or if you get at odds with yourself by the way that you're affected by this, you are setting yourself up to make poor choices and to basically diminish your emotional experience. And I will never advocate for people diminishing their emotional experience.
If
It was a long
anything,
answer.
I that's the information that I think people are looking for, and it's just trying to turn those into actionable terms is always kind of an interesting thing because we get a lot of concepts that are thrown at us, but trying to realize, okay, like I get what I'm supposed to do, but how do I do that? Like, what can I
Right.
actually do? The dividing your office space is because I see Chibi's here in chat right now. I know she's struggled working from home. That it's not and some people. For me, it's fine, but for others, they're going to react differently. Setting up a specific office space might be helpful there, maybe not, but it's interesting. One of the other things that that made me think of is where I've had a sleep disorder for most of my life as well, and falling asleep was always difficult. One of the things that I learned
Mm,
was sleep hygiene, and the
yeah.
definitions there was, that you set your bedroom as a place for sleep or sex. There isn't a TV in the bedroom. That there isn't, you don't read in bed. You don't do because you train your brain to react to different things, and so if your brain understands I lie in bed and then I fall asleep, then it next time you lay in bed, over
Or have
time,
sex.
or or both.
Or both.
But
If that's what you're into.
yeah, whatever. But that you can actually get your brain trained to respond to those certain things,
Yes.
and it works because I have I have a TV in bed and I use my iPad and stuff like that. But one of the interesting things for me is building off of that, I wear earplugs when I sleep. And now when I put earplugs in, I like my body
Get
starts
tired.
shutting down. I am like
Yep.
that is the done. And if I wake up like my dogs want to go outside or I have to grab a drink or something and I leave them in, I'll be able to stay mostly asleep the entire time and then just go right back to sleep. But as soon as it's time to wake up, I pull out my earplugs and my body's like, "Okay, we're booting back up." But you
Yep.
can extrapolate that and take that to different things of setting up your office space, kind of giving your brain expectations of I'm in this space, this is what's going to happen, and then that helps to I assume diminish the anxiety of I don't some of those pieces. Um,
You're basically talking about classically conditioning yourself. Like you have built in
Pavlovian
an
responses
association.
with
Yes. Like exactly. In the same way
Xeni's in the
that my
chat
heart
for
races when I see the zine emote, you get tired when you put your earplugs in. It's true. And funnily enough, a lot of people actually will eh, engage like when you hear people say a lot like, I masturbate before I go to bed. Like sometimes people will say that jokingly, but what you don't realize is like you have created a ritual, and a lot of times like that very thing happens for people, and it is amazing the way that our brain loves rituals. It loves when it knows what to expect. It loves when it knows I'm gonna when I put these earphones in or when I brush my teeth. Like, it's the sort of the reason why, no matter what time I get up to go to bed, before I go to bed, you pee. It's, like, amazing, right? Like, it's not like all of a sudden at 2 o'clock you have to pee. It's, like, immediately before you go to bed. It's because your brain knows, "We're going to bed, man. So let's go." Like, it's the brain's
empty the tank.
amazing with the way that it anticipates things like that. So, routines are super important, but the thing that I will say about routines in this time where we're all sort of, like, jammed in our house and, like, are stuck is you do want to inject a level of novelty into your routine. And that can be really difficult to do right now. And you have to be creative with the ways that you do that. For example, my wife, between therapy sessions, will get up and she will do laps around our apartment and she'll do
Does she power
different
walk with the arms on the
she'll start,
sides?
yeah, like she has these 2 milk jugs that are filled with sand
Okay.
that she walks around with because my wife really likes to work out and she loves exercise and she can't really go to the gym right now. So she's come up with these creative ways to try to do that. She also has, I know some of you can see behind me on the windowsill, or you could earlier, that there's like these things of sand. Well, like my wife created this project of trying to dry out this bag of sand that she bought from the hardware store so she could fill the jugs, and it's given her something to like engage that's new to pay attention to while she's, dealing with being cooped up in the house. I've had to, the couch behind me, whenever I'm between sessions, I get 10 minutes between sessions, I will go lay on that couch and like look at Reddit. And like it just creating these little mini ways to inject a degree of novelty into your daily routine while also maintaining the big parts of your routine is just it's immensely helpful just for your health. And realizing that like you can still create your day, and you have actually more power to create your day. And that leads me to the other thing I was going to say, which is for those of you that are lucky enough to be able to work from home, like me, like using, and like probably so many other people in chat right now, uh, working from home presents sort of a unique opportunity to flip the way that you prioritize your schedule to where I know for like me and for a lot of people, they've said that like they have some flexibility in the way that they do their work from home and like how much time they can do it. Build your work around your self care instead of the other way around. So, I actually was talking to somebody recently about how their goal every day is to fill the red circle on their Apple Watch, and that that's their priority every single day, and that they've built their work schedule around that. So, I take 15 minutes every couple hours to get up and walk around, and I do that no matter what, and I build my work schedule around it. If you have the flexibility to do that, I recommend that right now as well.
Okay. I was just noticing Victoria got herself timed out, so she's
Of course she did.
she's bringing on the wrath of the mods onto herself.
My super mod just
Your super mod just
getting
got
getting
smacked
getting
around. Listen,
getting
we
smacked
we
around in zine.
I don't know what's going on your channel, but we have a certain set of standards here, okay? And
Well,
you're
mine's just Riff Raff Central.
nice. This is kind of an interesting question, one I really don't have any input on. I was wondering why my panic attacks stopped when this shit started. I haven't had one in 3 weeks. I usually have them multiple times a day.
Oh, hard for me to say because I don't know the specifics of this person's situation, but my hypothesis would be in general, this is not, I always got to say, this is not therapeutic advice. This
Sure.
is not me diagnosing or me giving any sort of professional opinion on this. My hypothesis would be for any person that's in that type of situation is that if you've been relegated now to having to stay within your home, you probably have this passive, like your brain passively has probably realized I don't have a lot of things I can't anticipate or I'm afraid of anticipating. Like my routine has been condensed into something that's a lot more manageable for me. So now all of a sudden things that might trigger anxiety where I'm afraid that my anxiety is going to get triggered and thus that positive feedback loop starts has been disrupted such that the positive feedback loop doesn't start in the first place. Therefore, a panic attack doesn't happen. So that would be my guess
Right.
is that, if a person going out into the world, there's too much to anticipate and that can cause it.
That's interesting. Like I hadn't considered that, but depending on the amount of investment you're putting into the overarching stress of everything with the disease and quarantine and everything like that, if you're not really investing heavily in that, then our routines are quite condensed and actually there's a lot
Yes.
less activity and a lot less stressors going on taking, outside of that overarching one. So that's kind of an
Yep.
interesting thought that I hadn't really thought. That's a thought I hadn't thought.
A
That
thought you
happens
hadn't thought?
sometimes. It's true.
It's nice. Yeah.
At
I
least
like when I think thoughts that I hadn't thought while I was thinking
oh,
about thoughts I hadn't thought about.
I gave up long ago and came to terms with the idea that and belief that I'm not sure I'll ever have an original thought. That someone else before me has always thought whatever it is I think.
Dude, that just hit me like a ton of bricks when you just said
I,
that.
I
Like
what
I had a physiological response when you just said that. That is crazy. I've never thought about that.
oh I have
Oh
already.
man.
I've already thought about it.
Whoa. Dude, you just kept me up for an extra 2 hours tonight. So thanks for that.
I'm
Oh my
sorry. Well,
god. That is what I'm gonna think about when I go to bed
I
tonight.
always thought about
I
people
love it.
doing research and talking about being at the forefront of their science because the research is literally defined as researching. You're refinding what we've already learned. You're just
Oh
bringing
man.
it back into yourself. And so I think about one, like, and this is completely off topic, but one of the things that I wish that we focused, and I think that would be the most beneficial for any and all of us to figure out is to put all of our resources into figuring out how to educate faster and more effectively because our entire lives, whether we're experts or not, are spent relearning things that people have already learned, and it's
Mhm.
only and then but then I think of, like, being one of those people that reaches the edge of thought to where you're learning something that no one else has learned, and I gave up long ago, like, I'm just a dude playing Minecraft on the internet, like, that's not me, you know? But yeah.
As he goes on the ever long journey of trying to find an original thought, he fills plays
He
Minecraft to
fi
fill
plays
the gap.
Minecraft, yeah, but, yeah, I had that, I gave up on that long ago, so noodle on
That
that one for a while, let that fester just for a minute and
Well, I will say that is what made my PhD program fun.
uh-huh,
I didn't feel like I really learned a lot until I got there because you sort of do spend a lot of, I won't go too long on this, but like I spent my 4 years of undergrad were all just, yeah, you're just crammed with information, some of which matters and some of it that doesn't. But honestly, when you come out of your undergrad, generally, unless you're doing something like in STEM, you probably don't have too much knowledge about whatever field you're in that would actually like make a giant impact. You might, but even my master's program, like I learned how to be a therapist, but it was like mostly me learning how other people did therapy. And then they were the ones that just took the time to write about how they did therapy. It wasn't until my PhD program where we actually said, let's critique the ideas. Let's come up with some new ideas, or let's rehash ideas in such a way that we can combine them to think we made something new. And like, let's actually challenge some of this stuff. And that is where I learned the most about how to be a therapist. And I really do agree with you on that. I wish that we had more of, let's play with ideas, and let's be cognizant of like legitimate ideas that are out there. Like, let's not build up crazy conspiracy bullshit, but like let's look at stuff and maybe play with it in a way that like is grounded in our understanding of it, not just because you have a hunch about something, but because you have a really good understanding about how things work. And now let's move the envelope.
right.
I agree though. Yeah, that's a conversation. That would be a great conversation for another day, because that one's
That would
education's great, man.
Oh, educate yeah. Whew.
So
You say that anxiety just wants to be acknowledged. Does that mean that you
yes.
would approach it by ignoring it or some other way? I mean, that
No.
you don't want to
No.
ignore anxiety, right? Anxiety does
No.
not go away at all if it's ignored.
All it does is yell louder. No. Um, there are two major core responses to anxiety that you think makes it better, but it makes it worse in the long run. Makes it better in the short term, worse in the long run. First one is reassurance seeking behaviors, excessive reassurance seeking, and the second one is avoidance seeking behaviors. So if you experience anxiety and then you avoid it on a consistent basis as a way to mitigate it in your mind, you are doing short term gain for long term sabotage. Because all anxiety is going to do is say, okay, fine, you want to lock me away. I'm just going to scream a hell of a lot louder, and I'm going to come out in ways that you don't really want me to. It's a terrible idea. Reassurance seeking behaviors also doesn't help, because what it does is it forces you in a space where only other people can calm down or mitigate your anxiety, as opposed to you engaging in your own self-soothing. So those two things cause a whole bunch of damage, but they're usually the go-tos for people that are experiencing strong amounts of anxiety. So ignoring anxiety is one of the worst possible things you can do. Anxiety needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be appreciated for what it's trying to do. And then you say, as the person experiencing the anxiety, thanks, I'll consult you, but I'm going to take the reins here, and I'm going to make decisions about what I want to do and what I want to tell myself. You get to consult with me, but you don't get to decide. So I appreciate you. I hear you. I see you. Hi. But we're good. I'm going to make a decision that I know is better for me, and maybe it's what you're telling me to do and maybe it isn't.
Right.
So do
That
not ignore it.
Yeah, and from what I've learned, and you might have better input here, but trying to talk. I don't deal with anxiety myself, but talking to people who have been mid panic attack, like really trying to tell them like calm down, like settle down, like just that sort of thing. That's not really the way to go.
No,
My friend,
it's never
a
worked.
fellow streamer, Ika, jokes about and this was in relation to telling, we were talking about things you don't say to a woman. So, not meaning to be sexist, but he was like, you don't ever tell a woman to be a calm down, because that takes whatever she's mad at and makes it you. Which kind of, I was like, hey, oh yeah, it does. Um, But yeah, you have to kind of like you explore it and you acknowledge this is happening, but then try and find out how can you be in control, or where's that kind of wandering off the rails, and like it's all a journey in trying to to learn how to handle yourself, because that's the things that none of the behaviors that I assume that you're giving, or actions, like it's not a one size fits all. It's not do this and you won't be
Right.
anxious, do this and you won't be depressed. Like these all manifest in different ways, and they have the same signs that are kind of looked for diagnostically, but the solution is very different from person to person. And that's where the therapist and the schooling, the education comes into really being
Yeah.
able to help recognize and identify that. But all we can talk about for you guys is general concepts and things to kind of be aware of, but it's up to you, as person experiencing it, to really start to try and put together your treatment plan for you. And if you don't feel like you can do that, if you're not feeling like you're in control of that, then that's where one of the places that therapy can really help you. But
Yes.
for myself, as I've said, I became very introspective and very analytical of emotions that I'm feeling, because I just learned that I couldn't trust that they were real. And like many of them were, but wait a minute, that sucked, but why do I feel like an absolute piece of shit from it? Is that really a reasonable response, or is that something external, like pushing me down? And sometimes it's like, no,
Well,
no, I sucked, but other times it's like,
here's the thing.
well, okay,
I'm gonna, if you don't mind me dissecting a little bit what you just said
absolutely,
there. So, um, I'm a piece of shit,
okay,
not a feeling. So the thing that people often think is that they're narratives and that their thoughts are feelings. They aren't. So when a person says I feel like a piece of shit, what they're saying is they're choosing to use the thought that says I'm a piece of shit. They're making a value judgment based off of an emotional experience that they're having. Emotions at the end of the day are just raw input from the environment. It's just your brain's response to an input from the environment. So if you feel ugh and you feel awful or whatever it is, it's just your brain responding. Because we have this nasty little prefrontal cortex that likes to get in our way sometimes, we develop thoughts as explanations of what it is that we are experiencing. And sometimes we create thoughts that are not particularly useful, but then we conflate those with feeling. So I challenge people all the time on stuff like that. And the way that you can challenge yourself on this is for anybody, not just using, is if you ever put the word like or that after the word feel, you probably aren't going to say a feeling. You're going to give me a thought. And a lot of times I will intercept that when I'm working with people and say, you know what? I want you to rephrase that sentence, but instead of saying like or that after feel, I want you to just say I feel and then say something else. And then people have to confront what the emotional experience is.
hmm,
We block our emotional experience a lot with our thoughts. And if I was to say, oh, I feel like it's going to rain tomorrow. It's not a feeling. The
hmm,
feeling is like I've got some sort of physiological response. Maybe I'm anxious, maybe I'm hopeful, maybe I'm curious, whatever it might be. And I've decided that it must be because of what the weather is going to be tomorrow. But feeling like is never going to give a person a feeling. And if you monitor, and I would challenge anybody in chat, myself and you included, Zine, that if you ever find yourself saying, I feel like, stop yourself and try and say the sentence again without saying like or that, and you'll be amazed what you come up with.
hmm.
Our
that
emotions are just a
that's
template. That's all
interesting.
they are. Now,
I
that said, you can will emotions into existence through your thoughts, which is generally how anxiety sometimes goes off the rails because you can construct thoughts that then elicit an anxious response. So there is that. But
so
sorry, I didn't mean to cut
No,
you
no,
off
no,
there.
no. That you. I mean, that's why you're here, is to kind of offer that deeper insight than what I had. I do want to take a second to acknowledge something went in chat, and it was an exchange that is going to stay with me for a little while, even though I don't know that it really grabbed anybody else. But LLB contributed that when someone tells her to calm down, she likes to fire pretend lasers out of her eyes at them as if she were shooting them with lasers, I assume. Now, that was clever, and I was amused by that, but the immediate follow-up was and I was like, that's pretty unique. But the immediate follow-up was someone saying, me too. And that's where I was like, wait, is this a common thing? Is the pretend lasers
Wait,
at the
you
eye?
don't do that?
All right, all right. Well, that's a wrap, everybody.
Guys, hey, guys, should we tell him?
Should we tell him? Listen, I'm part of the ear rumbling crowd. Okay, I can do things that other people, some people don't even have a concept of. Okay.
Oh my God, guys.
Wow. Okay. This is awkward.
Cat, can you believe he didn't know this?
I have not, as far as I'm aware, fired pretend laser beams at anyone. So maybe I should see a therapist about
I'll bet,
this. I feel
I'll
like
bet
I'm not normal now.
Zine was sitting here going, lasers out of your eyes. That seems like an original thought. Nobody's thought about that before. And literally 601 people have thought about it before.
Wow. Wow. Okay. First off, I have 603 over here, so way to take two of my viewers away. Thanks for that. Um,
I was taking myself out of it.
yeah. Okay. I should count. Not
I'm giving you one of those,
not
one of
including
those,
us.
dude.
I see 601 other people. Actually, that's true. So fine. Um, so someone asked any tips of dealing with both anxiety and depression. I feel like that's kind of the overarching conversation. I don't know that there's really
Yeah.
a specific that we can give there. It's you need to be more specific if you want us to be able to try and identify that. But then it gets into the we're
Mhm.
not here to give therapy either. We're trying to give broader ideas. One of your things that you mentioned was, with anxiety, it was worrying about what you can't control. That's something that I talk on a lot as well. I actually know it from while I didn't take a whole lot from it, I did take this of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think, or Stephen Covey, where he talks about the
Excellent.
circle of influence and the circle of concern. And so basically, you have a circle of concern, which is all the things that you worry about in your life, and then within that, you have a smaller circle of influence, which are the things you can actually control, and about how to be effective, to be capable is to focus on the things that, and to try and narrow that concern down to only things you can control, because you can't. If you can't control it, then your time spent worrying about it, fretting over it, fearing it, is lost time. There's nothing to gain. It's literally out of your hands and out of your control. Obviously, there's a certain point where you do need to worry about what's going on in the world and,
Sure.
and that sort of thing. But I think that that I had never really equated that to being part of handling anxiety and trying to cope with anxiety. But it makes sense that anxiety is based out of worrying about the what ifs, and that's something, again, I don't suffer from it myself personally, but talking to people who do, and it's like they'll be like, yeah, but what if, and they'll lay out this, like, not crazy is the wrong word, but a very elaborate, contrived scenario of things going wrong, leading to an ultimate horrific event for them. And they're like, what if
Yep.
that happens? And I'm like, then we all die. Like, we can't stop the meteors, so why worry about it, And
Yeah.
it is interesting just how that seems to be kind of a looking out, and but that kind of, I don't know if that relates back or not, but it makes me think of one of the pieces of advice that I've been giving people, and have heard that it's somewhat helpful, is I tell them to either, with concerns of what's going on, either look down or look up. Just don't look where you are. And by that, I mean, look down if you are feeling overwhelmed and like you can't handle everything that's going on, and you are being flooded with emotion and with input and fear and stuff. Then narrow your view to where, if you need to get down to that point where you're worrying about just the next second, where you're just thinking about your breath,
Mhm.
where you're just breathing in, breathing out, and just look, stop trying to take it all in and just take in what's immediately in front of you. And then as you as you deal with that, then you can kind of reclaim yourself, recenter, and then you can start to kind of broaden that view back to where you're taking in, the rest of the day, or whatever it is, but to not try and comprehend everything because there is so much. Alternatively, what it depending on your, whatever works for you, is to take the broader view and understand that this is a temporary thing. It's big, and it's happening, and we're in the middle of it, but life will go on. Society's not going to collapse. We will, see the other side of it, and there's going to be short-term strife, but ultimately we'll be on the other side looking back, and this too shall pass, basically. Whichever way kind of helps you, whether
Mhm.
it's looking beyond it and seeing that there is hope and sunshine and rainbows and kittens and puppies on the other side, or if it's not worrying about anything and just focusing on what's my breath feel like breathing in, what's my
Mhm.
breath feel like breathing out. Whichever way, either look down or look up. But don't try and take in all the anxiety and everything that makes you nervous all at once and process it, because it's just too much. So
All of which implies, and what I like about that, and the thing that's important to realize at a process level about that stuff, is that you have all of you, like literally every single person watching this right now, is you have the ability to direct what it is that you focus on. A lot of times people will resign that as if they do not. They will sort of like forego the fact that they have the ability to do that. Go, no, I can't. I can't do that. I can't. And I'm sure there are people that were listening to you right now say that were like, no, I can't do that. You absolutely can. You sort of have to choose to do it, and you have to recognize if you're not used to doing something like that, it's going to take effort. It's going to take work. These things don't just happen, and that's what makes dealing with a lot of this really difficult. Is when people are confronted with change, navigating change, and adapting to uncertainty takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of cognitive effort, and that is tiring for people. And so, if you can go into this understanding that it can normalize that whole process of like, you know what? I should be tired. Like I'm trying to do new things. I'm trying to get my way through this. I'm coming up with creative things here to try to get through what's going on for me. And I am looking down when I'm panicking. And that was really tiring for me to do. So was that wrong? And the answer would be no, you did something new. And your brain doesn't like doing something new because the older you get, the harder it is to do that. And you just don't have the plasticity for it. And so you've literally recalibrated something. It's going to take yourself a little bit of time to adjust to that. And if you can have some patience and grace for yourself in that space and hold yourself accountable to continue doing it, it gets easier over time. It just, and you're no better time to start doing those things in the present. This whole circumstance with COVID has forced people to have to look at aspects of themselves, has poked a lot of holes in people, and has really forced people to have to confront some of their emotional experience and some of like the things that stress them out, and has held them in a container where they can't really get away from it in a way that you might usually be able to do. I can't escape by watching sports. I can't do it like I've been playing way too many video games lately, but like we're forced to have to sit with some of this stuff. And that's a good thing if you take that and make the decision to look at that as something that you will take on, as opposed to choosing to see it as expect that this is going to be this debilitating thing you can't handle. I can't as an expectation.
Right.
And you're going to look for every reason why that your experience fits that.
That actually speaks almost in my I interpret very well to one of the next comments. You mentioned earlier about managing your expectations so that you don't get dissonance with your experience. Do you have any advice
Mhm.
for changing your internal expectations? I can wake up and want to be productive, but changing the internal monologue and changing the internal expectations seems much harder.
It
Exactly.
is.
It because you're changing a habit. You're changing and the brain builds pathways to common thoughts and to common and so it basically wants the shortcut as much as possible, which is why habits
Mhm.
basically established as far as I'm aware. And so you're saying don't go down this usual path, instead go down this path that is long and winding and difficult. And the brain's like, yeah, but I could just be
I'd
done.
rather
I
not.
could just go over there. And you have to continually do it until the brain has basically worn that path to where now it's the more comfortable one, where it's like, yeah, oh yeah, that's what I do over here. So it's really easy for us. I mean, and this is expanding out, of course, because it's what we do. But it's really easy to know that you should change. It's a lot harder to do so, but understand and give yourself allowance for that as well, because a lot of people just beat themselves to hell and back for
Mhm.
not being able to immediately change and adjust a behavior that's been ingrained with them for perhaps their
Long
entire
time.
life. I mean, you think of
Has been
overeating and
conditioned.
that sort of
Yep.
thing. Yeah, everyone who has to deal with obesity knows this is a problem that I should change. That doesn't Knowing that doesn't make it easy or
Right.
solve the problem. So that's
Right.
that's the first step, is acknowledgement, but the next step is the actual hard one, and it's just work. And so changing your experiences, or not experience, your expectations, that's all part of working on building habits and changing behavior, which it's a big deal.
It
So,
is. I'll give you the I'm gonna give a very super, super
the super
mini
condensed.
version
And then we're gonna do a
of
lightning round of questions, but give me
all
your mini
right,
version.
of one of my most favorite. I'm glad you picked that question out because I saw it way back and I think it's a great one. Of a lecture that I give to graduate students. For those who don't know, I actually used to be an assistant professor at Northwestern University, and I'm not anymore. I resigned, but
That was
um,
recent,
I
wasn't it?
it was last summer. It's only been almost a year.
Oh, I thought your
Um,
Wednesday days were still prepping to give.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I still teach. I'm not an assistant professor
Okay,
anymore, though.
okay,
Now I'm just
sorry.
a course instructor. Anyway, I taught a human development class, a graduate level human development class, and I talk about this a lot. And the thing about this is the older you get, tapers off about 30, and then it kind of exponentially gets more difficult. When you experience cognitive dissonance, you sort of are presented with a choice of what you're going to do in order to mitigate that cognitive dissonance. You experience it as what's called aversive arousal, which is where it's anxiety basically. You're presented with a choice of how you're going to manage that. A lot of people, what they will try to do is they will try to jam their experience that they're having into a pre-existing expectation. They will refuse to change the expectation. They'll come up with all sorts of reasons why their experience needs to be invalidated, and they will further validate their expectation. Common example I give of this is if you walked outside tomorrow morning or looked outside, stay inside. So you looked outside tomorrow and the sky was purple, just straight up as purple as my chair. What most people will do in that moment is they will say something along the lines of, I must be dreaming. I must be high. Something's off. There's no way that that's real. And what that suggests is that you are holding firm to the idea that you expected the sky to be blue and that it must still be blue, and thus you will invalidate your experience of the fact that you're seeing it as purple. You'll say there's window tint. There's all of those explanations that people will come up with. Now, that may be well and good if you woke up the next day and you found the explanation, but let's say you wake up the next day and it's still purple. Now, all of a sudden, you're presented with the choice of do you continue to tell yourself the story that fits that expectation, or do you maybe have to change your expectation of what color the sky is? Most people will struggle with that. So, to bring it back to mental health and you, is if you have built an expectation of yourself and you have an experience that's outside of it, you are likely going to come up with every excuse in the book to invalidate your experience to fit the expectation you have. I can't do this. I'm not capable. I'm whatever. What I would suggest to anybody that's in that space, and it's incredibly difficult to do this, is to widen your expectation of yourself, to consider that it is possible that there could be a more wide expectation that you might have for yourself, that maybe you are worthy. Maybe it's possible that you are worthy of love. Maybe it could be that you are capable of getting out of bed today. And if you can build that expectation in, if you get out of bed while you're depressed and you built an expectation that maybe you could get out of bed, it will more easily align and you won't experience the anxiety of that because you've built the expectation. That gets way harder to do over time. And so you've got to start now with that. It's called accommodation. It's assimilation versus accommodation. You want to accommodate as best you can. It takes effort. We don't like doing it, but if you do it, it makes the world a lot easier place to live in because you start to consider other options, which is why diverse representation and all sorts of cool stuff like that is so important, and why conversations about these things are important, because then people can see alternative expectations that they can create for themselves.
And
Okay.
yeah, as the resident 60-year-old guys, it gets a lot more difficult.
It will
So
take more work.
it's
It will. It literally will. From a brain science perspective, it will take more work.
all right. So I've got 61 questions right now.
Holy shit.
Well, I don't know that we're gonna be able to get through all of them. We've been going for a good long while, and I don't want to take all of your time. And I think you work
I'm
tomorrow.
cool.
I
I
actually
do.
I'm furloughed tomorrow, so I've got I'm off.
You got time.
Yeah, I've got time. But when comparing anxiety and depression, there are many similarities and differences, but treatment via medication is the same. I have generalized anxiety disorder, but am on an antidepressant to try and manage it. Why are the same drugs used for managing both?
I can't answer that question because I'm not a psychiatrist.
Fair enough.
I don't do much with medication management, so I don't entirely know the answer because I never prescribe medication. I don't have a medical degree. I can't do that. So um, I would talk to your doctor about it. Ask your psychiatrist or your general practitioner, whoever uh, prescribed it to you. You should ask that person those questions of why they chose what they chose to treat you with, and they had damn well better be able to answer that question for you. But I don't really know the answer to that in a way that's going to provide any depth.
Yeah, it's like I could theorize. I have a pretty good idea, but not to where it'd be
Yeah.
great to to throw in. Also, thank you for the 25 sub bomb. Sins the Great, appreciate that. Just making sure I move that. For someone who deals with anxiety every day and have recently had anxiety attack because of the virus situation, I do try to do news blackouts and try not to read the news and things, but I always seem to think about it, and so I almost always feel sad. Do you have any tips for trying to get your brain off of this? It's that gets into an interesting thing of avoidance versus. I mean,
It
I
does.
don't know what the right term alternative avoidance, but there's a certain point for me where I've been telling people make sure that you can turn off some of those anxieties and you can stop worrying about things, but you do need to be processing, you do need to be understanding where we're at and not just purely avoiding and don't, la 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 la, because that isn't handling it either. That's you were talking about that earlier with anxiety of the short-term gain of avoiding the problem
Hmm.
altogether while also creating a bigger problem later on. Do you have anything you want to add on to that of how to kind of go
Yeah.
down that?
So this is there's a deeper answer there, but it would take me a long time. I'll give the shortened answer of this, which is you want to be weary of whether checking the news is acting on an impulse versus if it's something that you are choosing to do because you are sort of like it's an informed decision for you to do it. And what I mean by that is a lot of times the way that anxiety you can tell if you are checking the news to reassure anxiety versus if you are checking the news because you have a desire to learn more about what's going on. And that's generally a felt experience. I generally recommend that like with checking the news, for example, in these cases, check the news when you want to, not when you feel like you have to or when like your sort of your internal narrative is I have to check this. It will I have to do this. You don't necessarily want to act on that impulse necessarily because it may be that that's an avoidance of the anxiety or an excessive reassurance seeking behavior. You want to do it on your terms. That's the best I could give.
Yeah, you can almost turn into checking the news or keeping up on what like you can turn it into a part almost a mini obsession that feeds the anxiety loop and turns it
Hmm.
as well. So at least that's something that I would guess and so just making sure that you're maintaining that agency over deciding how to
Hmm.
do it.
Correct.
We had a conversation about what agency means. So, is there an
We did.
actual difference between an anxiety attack and panic attack? I don't know of one. Is it just layman's term, or are they different
Mm,
things? I would say my guess would be they're the same thing, just different.
they're pretty much similar. I don't know that it's really worth me getting into like any detail of how you would look at the difference. Like they're generally very similar. They're both positive feedback loops of being anxious about being anxious. They can manifest differently. Sometimes people panic like where they have an outward display, and sometimes it's more of an inward where they freeze and lock up. Like you can have a panic attack and a person not even notice it's a panic attack. Like you literally just internally freeze and be internally panicking. That's usually a harder one for people to recognize as happening in the given moment, but not really. The only difference I'll give is like sometimes if you do separate the two, panic attacks tend to be a more intense manifestation of an anxiety attack. But I don't know that it really matters much to look at a difference.
Okay. You talked about trying to recognize which thoughts are depression brain talking. How do you reconcile that with not feeling bad when recognizing them doesn't make them go away? Let me try and
Yeah,
follow
can you ask
that.
me that one again?
Yeah. Sorry, Jay. You talked about trying to recognize which thoughts are depression brain talking, right? Like me
Uh-huh.
external holding depression as an external force affecting me. How do you reconcile that with not feeling bad when recognizing them doesn't make them go away?
Oh, there's so many double negatives in that.
J- J-
I much love to whoever
Jay,
asked me that question, but
that's
it's
Blue
really
Jay.
hard to it's hard to process that. Oh,
Y-
Blue Jay stops by my stream all the time.
yeah.
I love you. I love you, Blue Jay.
We,
It's a hard,
I need a comment in there somewhere, Jay. I'm sorry. I'm
yeah. Can you, Blue Jay, if you could rephrase
yeah,
that, that
just
would be really helpful.
yeah. Because
My brain doesn't want to
like
process that right now. Well, you know what? Let me say this. Let me say this because I think I'm starting to put it together.
okay.
Depressive thoughts are still your thoughts. So when as a therapist, when we're working to like separate those two things and talk about depression as an external force, it is still you. It's more of a like just like like a way of helping a person determine that like the emotional experience is something that is affecting them. But you're still generating the thoughts. Like it's your brain. It's not like a separate human jumped in there and is saying something to you. So taking ownership of those thoughts eventually is something that's going to be really important. But um, depression is a feeling. Like depression is a physiological experience. It is not an amalgam of thoughts. And so it's important to make that distinction that the thoughts that your brain is either generating or that you are consciously pulling to mind are things that you have a lot more of a ability to manipulate and control and choose to focus on than changing your emotional experience is. That's a long gain or long-term process. And with depression, a lot of times that happens with the help of medication to help catalyze that process. So depression is in and of itself an emotional experience. It's a feeling. It's not an amalgam of thoughts. So the thoughts are still things that you're generating as the result of that emotional experience and may further perpetuate that emotional experience depending on what thoughts you choose to attend to. But I, as a therapist, am going to be focusing on with a person what are the thoughts you're choosing to attend to and why, and what is the function of that, and what are the long term consequences of it,
Right.
and holding a person accountable to that more so than to their emotional experience.
So
That's the best I can do without having that question
but
rephrased.
I think I've got it to where they're asking they're saying, so I talked about recognizing, you know, that external or externally recognizing the modifier in there at least, and then how do I take that and turn that into not feeling bad when I see that that's happening? Is I think that's ultimately the question, is how do I take that from point A of saying this thought is kind of depressive based versus and then saying how do I resolve the depression with that? And honestly, it helps for me to understand, but it never like the thing about depression is you're in for the ride.
Yep.
And it wasn't that, oh, this is just a depressive thought, so I'm not going to feel it, because I still feel it, or not, or emotion, I still feel it, I still had to deal with it. Medication went miles and miles and miles to allowing me to be more in control of that, but you still feel the thought and it still hits you. But understanding, I guess, I don't know if this is going to make sense, but understanding where the thought originated from, and I don't know whether you disapprove of my externalizing of the two, but for me, it helped of
If it works
understanding
for you, it works for you.
understanding it was depression that caused that feeling, or that's making that feeling so much worse. I think is more that it's that like modifier of times 50, whatever that feeling is.
Yep.
Understanding that helped it to not affect me long term. I still had to feel the emotion, I still felt it, it still impacted me, but it didn't change how I saw myself, because I recognized that it wasn't a grounded, rational feeling. It wasn't correct, but it was something I still had to deal with. So I think,
Feelings are never rational.
well, yeah,
Feelings
okay,
aren't rational.
okay, but there, I would say I agree with that. Although I would say that there's points where you're feeling inappropriate feeling for a situation, and to me, that's a rational feeling. Like, you know,
The I
if
see
the
what you're
person I
saying.
if the person I love kisses me, then I feel contentment, and that's an appropriate feeling for that. Or if someone I hate says something bad about me, and I feel extra bad, even though they shouldn't, then that might tell me, wait, should I be feeling? That's an irrational feeling. Like, I don't care what they think anyway, so should I really be feeling that way? Now, again, this might be where the layman versus the technical split off, but that would be my interpretation.
Well, I mean,
Feel free to stomp on that.
you're not well, you're not wrong. Like I understand where you're coming from. And I think that the nuance that I might add to that is, let's say that the person you love kisses you and you get angry. Like you experience anger. Now, whether it makes sense as a person has constructed it for you to be angry in that moment, the truth of the matter is you experienced anger. For whatever reason, your brain had a response to that moment that elicited a sense of anger. Now, whether it's tied to the actual kiss itself or whether the kiss is the thing that set it off, the anger in and of itself needs a degree of attention, even if it's just to be curious about it, of like, what was that? Um, what happens sometimes when we look at our emotional responses as needing to be a certain way is it negates the fact that emotions are just responses. And so we don't really get to curate our emotions in a way necessarily that we want to. And generally that's what it's just our body telling ourselves something's off. Maybe I need to just pay attention to something. Do I need a little bit of reassurance over here? And maybe it doesn't make sense. And maybe it is like an anomaly. Or like, I really don't know where that came from. But when people get into a consistent pattern of negating what their emotional experience is in responses to something and suggest that it must be rational at all times, um, that puts too much pressure on us to try to create an emotional experience that a lot of times is really difficult for people to do, because emotions are something that we generally can change over time, but it's generally not super easy to change an emotion here in the moment. If it was, it would be one of those things where, like, let's say you got kissed and you got mad, and I'd look at you and say, "Zine, just feel happy about it." And you probably might be like, "Well, but I'm mad, and I don't really understand that. What's going on?" Like, it doesn't take away that emotional experience. So, to me, it's always worth that attention to the emotional experience, and then using our brain to sort of like make sense of what's happening in a way that might be healthier, in a way that might be curious, as opposed to a way that polarizes ourselves against our experience. So, um, you're like, what you're saying is true. There's sort of that added depth to it there that sits underneath it, if that makes sense.
All right, just call me out. That's fine. No problem. I thought I did an okay job, but take it from the
You
expert, guys.
did.
Take it from the expert. No. Sorry if this is too personal or anything. Oh, we're starting off spicy here. You can skip it if you like. Should I pre-read this? We're reading this live. I'm having a really hard time having motivation to do anything, including my hobbies even. Having to stay home and be lonely really isn't helping, and it's really affecting me hard. I've already had motivation problems since before the virus, and the thing that helps is the most is having attention. I just feel really lonely for some reason, even though I have a
Yep.
boyfriend and a bestie. And I tend to cling to people a lot now, kind of wanting to be noticed, but also really want to make them happy too. Making others happy makes me motivated, but I'm sure I hurt relationships with how clingy I am. Now, I'm not sure what I'm asking. I just want your opinion on this and possibly what to do. Sounds like primarily just you're using external factors as your validators, and so you're being cut off from that, and that's making it that's you're having to deal with handling yourself instead of having other people handle you for you. Is what would you say, Dr. Mick?
Um, it could be that. I have to be careful with how I answer
Okay.
questions like this. So,
Okay.
this is where I envy
I can say that
your
because I'm
position,
not a doctor.
because you could say those things. I have to be more careful with how I say those things. So what you said is certainly a possibility. I kind of have to say that. Um, the part that stands out to me is the motivation piece of this. I talk about this a lot. I swear to God, it amazes me how often motivation comes up. Motivation is fleeting, y'all. Like, anybody watching this right now, motivation is fleeting and it is not reliable. And if you look for motivation to be the thing that's going to drive you to get anything done, you are just going where the wind blows. It's just not reliable enough of a thing to wait for in order to get things done. Discipline is what gets things done. Motivation can catalyze discipline. Discipline's what gets stuff done. So, discipline is doing things that you want to do despite the fact that in the moment you don't want to do them. And really, it's a muscle that you have to build. It's not something that you can just do. It's way easier said than done. But you can't wait for motivation. So, if you're a person that, for the most part, sort of is like, yeah, I just, when I get motivated, it's great, and then I do things. You probably have reached a point where maybe the motivation has fallen, and then all of a sudden you're not productive because you've been waiting for that burst of energy, and it's just not sustainable. So that's the part that stands out to me in that, is if you're waiting for motivation right now, you might be waiting for a long time. And I say that to anybody, not just the person who asked that question. Uh, Build in some disciplinary skills right now. It's a good opportunity to do that. Decide what you want to do, what's important, what's a priority, and then build up the steps, the micro steps to get there, and make those small, manageable goals.
Yeah, I would say that highly motivated is not an actual thing. It's highly disciplined people get
Yes.
in places. And
Yes.
I get asked semi regularly, because it's about me. But I get asked semi regularly, how do I maintain a full time job? How do I do my YouTube stuff? How do I do my streaming stuff? All in that, and it's one
You
I've
work
built a
hard.
routine. But I just, whether I want to be doing it or not, I still do it. And now I'm to the point where I have my routine, and so it feels weird to not be doing it. And it's I almost have to be motivated. Like, I have to look for reasons to cancel a stream, not to go on a stream, and that's because I've done it and created that routines and set that habit. And it's a discipline thing,
Yes.
and a willingness to forego sleep, but that's more beside the point. But yeah, the motivation is just you can't trust it. And
Cannot
one
rely on it.
one of the things that my bad habits is I tend to be like, well, I'll get around to, doing the lawn when I feel motivated to do the lawn, or, like little house chores. Like, some days you do that. Like, I'm feeling it, and you go and you get, and that does happen. You have that energy, you have that
Great.
pep. It's wonderful. But
Seize the day.
if you're waiting for the next time that comes, guess what? I need to call a landscaper and have them come out and do a several $1,000 fix on my yard because I let it go the entire summer without getting out to it once. Like it is, I have raptors
Is
in the
that a
tall
true
grass. So
story, or are
yeah,
you,
100% true. 100% true. I am that neighbor that everyone, like, they go out on their porch and they look out and they're like,
my
look at the
dad would hate
subdivision,
you.
and I am the one that's like overgrown. Because I hate yard work, and so why would the motivation ever come to me? Why would I ever be like, yeah, today's the day I'm gonna go do something I don't enjoy? If I had disciplined myself to do it regularly, that might have been a thing. I
Oh,
also
man.
set myself up to fail because I was like, yeah, you know what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get an extra workout, so I'm only gonna get a push mower because that way when I do it, I'll also get a workout too, which just means that I have that much more that I don't want to do because it's push mower is a pain in the ass. Like, there's a whole lot there, but motivation can't be what
Is that a
you
humble
hope for.
brag about how big your yard is that you
I
wish you
have the
had a
smallest
riding mower?
I no, not a riding mower, a like running mower, like a motorized
Oh.
versus a literal push mower. Like I'm thinking like 50s blades push mower
Oh,
versus
man.
no.
Dude, I had a guy I grew up with in my neighborhood who had one of those, and I was fascinated by it.
It's cool
They're harder
for
to push than you
oh
think they
oh
are.
they are. Oh, trust me, and
That's
especially
a
when you
workout.
only do it every 3 weeks because you're late, you're unmotivated. Um, so yeah, don't motivation is not a key here,
No,
and honestly, it's just a
no.
fleeting thing that it's great if it shows up, but discipline and focus is what's going to get you to accomplish things.
Same goes with therapy, by the way. Unmotivated clients are really hard to work with if they're waiting for motivation. Disciplined clients are the ones that really get shit done in their lives and and recognize that they are the ones that have to do a lot of the work. Anytime you ask a successful person what's the number one thing that got them there, they will generally tell you it was hard work. It's not. You can wish things all you want. You're not actually doing things if you're thinking about them. You're only doing them when you're doing them.
Right. How do you
And
know if
Zine works hard. You work hard. I know you do. So
oh,
I want to give you a shout out for that. It's very obvious you work hard.
thank you. How do you know if someone has a chemical imbalance versus a behavioral self-imposed mental health issue? That's doctor assessment. There's no way that you're gonna know that for yourself,
Yeah.
really. That's
Yeah.
go and talk to a therapist. Talk to. I mean, even if it's just asking your GP whether you should, although GP ideally will just refer you to a therapist. But yeah, that's not something for you to really do for yourself, I would
You're
say.
probably not going to know as a client. I will say that the quick answer to this is generally most therapists, other than like psychiatrists, not necessarily, but like a clinical psychologist or an MFT, will work with you first on trying to create different like skills and coping mechanisms and behavioral change and thought change and working with emotions and stuff like that. Generally, when those things have been given a really good effort and they're still not really making a difference, that's when it starts to become obvious that there might be more going on there than just a need for new behaviors. So that's one of the markers that a lot of therapists will use, just as a heads up for that.
They
But a
follow
therapist has to determine that.
Right, they followed up with it. It is possible though to know, and I would say like I mean, I no. I don't I can't think of anything like at least in my experiences where it's like I would be able to say, yes, this is a pathological thing because of a repressed memory that's happened to like, I mean if you analyze yourself enough then you might start to see where your motivations or whatever is, but it really that's not what you're trained to do. Like go to someone who's trained to
Yeah.
do that and let them help you.
Yep. 100%.
So I've always been shut in and never go anywhere except shopping, but after this thing happened 2 months back, I want to go out more and experience more, even if it puts me in danger. My question is this normal or something else happening? And is it okay for this change?
Totally normal. People are wanting to exert their autonomy right now in any ways that they can. A lot of people are feeling like their freedom and their autonomy has been stripped from them, and in a lot of ways it has,
It's
but for
reclaiming
good
control,
reason.
right?
Yeah, it's I want to be able to exert. I mean, talking about the influence you were talking about earlier, I want to be able to exert influence on the world. I want to be able to be in charge and have agency over how I'm navigating the world. And when I'm being told I can't, I mean, I Jesus, on any given day when this pandemic's not happening, I would kill for an excuse to just stay home and play video games for 10 hours. Now all of a sudden when you tell me that I have to stay in, I'm like, "Oh, man," like, yeah, I kinda wanna go for a walk, and it's because we want to have a level of control and autonomy in the world, and when it seems like it's been taken away, we find very creative ways to try to seize it back. So it's very normal. I've heard so much of that over the last 4 weeks.
One thing to add to that though is a lot of petulance is not the right, maybe it is the right word, but one of that feeling, like that desire to do that. Keep in mind that there is a bigger picture here of health and
Yes.
all of us, and
Yes.
we need to be in control of that and not, not necessarily just what's given isn't the right word, but to entertain that, because there is a reason that it's happening, and
Correct.
it's not because your oppressive government's overreacting. It's
You're doing
because
your part.
we're literally and we're literally dealing with life and death for certain people. Maybe even if it's
Yes.
not even you, and it could be you. That's what you don't know. So
That's
yes, it's a
right.
normal feeling, but be in control of your feelings
Cor and your decisions.
and
Yes.
be in control of your decisions. I feel like you were like, yeah, no, I did.
Yeah. Your feelings are okay. Acknowledge your feelings. It's
Acknowledge them,
alright.
but be in charge of your decisions.
Be in
You are in
charge of your
control of
decisions.
you.
That is
Um,
correct.
and then there are doctors that don't want to deal with physical health issues, so they blame them on depression. I was told that my dislocating joints were caused by depression. I
Never heard
find
that in my
find
life.
a, find a new doctor. And that's one of the things is people like the I had a terrible doctor story is one that I hear a lot. I'm sure you've
Yep.
heard it a lot.
All the
And
time.
obviously there's bad doctors out there, but there's hundreds and thousands of good doctors out there, and nothing is
Yep.
forcing you to stay with that bad doctor. Not getting into insurance or availability, I mean, okay, there are some factors that might be at play, but ultimately going to a doctor that is not helping you is a waste of your time, it's a waste of their time, and it's a waste of whatever money's being spent. Find a doctor that you are comfortable with, that is not telling you necessarily what you want to hear, but is telling you what you need to hear, and is listening to you and what your
Yep.
concerns are, because your concerns, like for yourself and for should never be belittled. They should never be diminished or you know written off, and particularly not by a doctor, because they're there to
Oh, yeah.
understand where to find that discomfort and help you find the best solution to that. So even if it's, my jaw's clicking, talk to the doctor and, oh, TMJ, but here's how we can help that. They're not just, well, the jaws click sometimes, have a nice day. Like, it's not the
Quit
point.
your bitching.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quit your bitching. Yeah,
Oh, man.
that's so bad doctors exist, but don't let a bad doctor define your experience with all doctors and
Correct.
force you. Um, this is a big soapbox for me, so I apologize
Go
for
for it,
going. But
man. I'm enjoying the
but
soapbox.
your goal in life should be the pursuit of your happiness. And by having a bad doctor prevent you from pursuing your happiness with finding a good one and pursuing treatment because you had a bad experience, no one's looking at you and thinking, wow, that person sure did a good job of not finding their happiness. Man, they toughed it out. Like, no, there's no prizes for that. There's just unhappiness. So always don't let that bad experience prevent you from continuing to pursue the best life that you can, because that is the reason for your existence, is to give yourself the best life that you can without being a dick to others, because that's not acceptable. But
Oh,
otherwise,
let's maybe not do that. Yeah.
yeah. But regardless, your pursuit of your happiness should be your ultimate goal. And just because you encountered a dickhead along the way doesn't mean that you give up on that and you just deal with where you're at because you had to deal with a dickhead once. Yes, you did. Move on, keep trying, because you're worth it. So,
Yes. Yeah. The thing is, people take good, not in a bad way, but people take good therapy, good doctor's visits, all these things for granted. They expect that that's what's going to happen, that they're going to have a good experience. So when people have good experiences with things, they don't talk about it. People really only talk about these things when they have bad experiences. It's the reason people are more afraid of flying than they are of driving, even though planes basically never crash. Because when they do, you hear about it. Whereas car crashes are a dime a dozen. So it's sort of the same concept here. Is like, if you have one bad experience, yes, it can absolutely freak a person out, but you sort of have to have a broader context around that and realize that one experience does not equal all experiences.
as a follow up, Kiwi said, my problem is I get different results from different doctors. I was told to lose weight around a thing by one doctor, but another is saying that I should be on meds to help it. the bodies are complex and there's a lot of different
Yeah.
factors. And so they're going to go with what it sounds like, but there's not, I mean, there is a kind of a flow chart of do this, do that. But the reality is a, everything, whether it's physical or not, has a dozen different treatments, and they're going to go with the one that they are comfortable with,
Yes, they are.
that they feel applies most to you, while mixing with their own comfort. And so you're going to get some different results, and really it's about trying the different ones, because it doesn't necessarily mean that either one was wrong. It's just they it's not clearly defined which one's the best solution for you. And so unfortunately, particularly with mental health or with behaviors and stuff like that, there's not this bone is broken, perhaps we set the bone and it heals. It's, well, it could be one of 47 different things. Let's start with the list and say this is the
Mhm.
most likely to help. If that doesn't, we'll try the next one.
Yep. Yep.
um I own my own business that relies on several people showing up in homes to shop. I'm terrified about not being able to continue afterwards, making money and caring for my kiddo, and trying really hard not to think about it. I have a depression, anxiety. Yes, I take meds. I worry about if I hold it in, ignore it, but don't want to let it out and cry about it all day, because that's not going to change anything. Last time I ignored something, I ended up in the hospital with an anxiety attack. Vicious circle. So your concern is about trying to like be the line of avoidance versus acceptance, and worrying that it's going to inflame within you to a point where it's going to create this anxiety attack again, I think is what that's saying.
That's kind of how I read it.
It's
That's one I can't say a lot to,
Yeah, that's
unfortunately. It
probably
goes a little bit too I would because and here's how I know, for those of you who have not met me before, um, the way that I generally know whether I can answer a question or not is if all of a sudden I dip into my, like, therapist assessment brain for what the next question would be that I would ask the person, and that's a question that has a lot loaded into it where I would need to know a lot more to be able to give any sort of good answer to that. So, um my hands are sort of tied on that one. So I apologize to the
yeah.
person who asked that, but I can't really go too far down that
Yeah,
one.
sorry, mama. I mean, and I, like, as someone not less bound, I appreciate the concern, but you're being anxious about being anxious. So try not to let that feed on itself. It's not necessarily that easy, but understand you're worrying about worrying, and that's a cycle
It's
that
a nasty loop.
that can really start, which is exactly what you said, vicious circle. And that's where I would say, if you're, in that case, I would say again, my look up, look down. I would say look down. Try not to focus that broadly. Bring it into where what can you control, and narrow in on. I have the ability to change these things, so I'm going to worry about those, and what will be outside of that until I get to that point, and I have to deal with those things next. But I will deal with those things when they are in front of me. That would
Yep.
be my advice.
I will
Um,
say that, again, as another plug, my YouTube channel's got mental health topic lectures on it, and I've got 2 that anybody who's resonating with that might find helpful. One is on panic attacks, and the other one is on intrusive thoughts and how to manage intrusive thoughts. I honestly recommend watching those 2 because it goes pretty in depth on how those 2 things work, and that's what those videos are there for, is to maybe answer those questions in a more in-depth way. Those are hard questions to answer because they are so deep and specific to the person and the way that it manifests itself. So a little bit of a plug for that you may find those videos to be helpful. That's what they're there for.
and the YouTube channel is under DrMickLive.
It's yeah, youtube.com/c/DrMickLive.
And then he also does a little bit smaller bites, but still bites that are really that I
Daily mental
enjoy
health tidbits.
on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
Twitter.com/DrMickLive, right?
Yep.
Okay. And so I haven't watched every YouTube video. I've watched several,
There's
and kind
over
of
150 of them. So
so I have watched several, and found them to be pretty interesting, except for the one that was really boring, man. I'm sorry, that one sucked. No, I'm
oh
kidding.
yeah, no, I know that one. I
Yeah,
gotta get
okay,
it.
yeah.
I gotta get it
Oh
out.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah. There's a
the Twitter stuff is really, it's just kind of really cool, because it's like not applicable. Don't worry about it. And then it's like, oh wait, what? And then you get 90 seconds of, here's just a quick insight into why it is that you're being silly right now. And I'm like, that is why I'm being silly, son of a bitch. So
I
um,
enjoy peering into your soul through YouTube.
yes, yes.
It's fun for me.
I've been
And
diagnosed with
now my watch is blowing up with people following me. Thanks for the follows. For
good,
those who are doing that.
good. Um, I remember tweeting something at you, and you've just be like mid game, and I think it was the first time that I was in your stream, and I sent it, and you were just like trying to figure, like, I don't know what to do
Like,
with my
why is my
hands."
watch blowing up? Yeah. Oh my god.
I've I've been diagnosed with depression and anxiety. However, within the last 6 months, my anxiety attacks have ramped up to panic attacks, especially when I go out in public. Understandable. I've
Mhm.
narrowed it down to my health problems, and when I am in public place, I can't in no way control the environment to make it safer for me and my health problems. The fact that I don't have insurance makes things worse because I can't get the help I need. Cass, yeah, no, all that's perfectly understandable. I didn't see a question in there specifically, but I mean, yeah, that's the tough
Yep.
thing is that there's a lot of factors being thrown at us that are outside of our control, and so again, for those of us who are particularly anxiety bent, it's going to be really rough to hold that in and not have that become an overwhelming feeling. And even for myself, when I'm not prone to anxiety, I still feel that stress, and again, this whole basis is start off
Mhm.
where I was like, I'm reacting to things weird. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't realize is the generalized stress that's happening. There's just the discomfort that we're all in that can manifest in a lot of weird ways. So
Yeah.
be aware of yourself and for weird behaviors right now, and try and also be aware of that for people you're around, because you're stuck with people that you're not normally having to deal with
Yeah.
in closer contact, and they might be reacting to things strongly. And you're like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why are you doing? And a little bit of allowance from both sides. Don't try not to overreact to something, even though you feel like it. And if someone's overreacting to something, try not to take that as personally, or and give them an allowance on both sides. Um,
Depersonalization is huge right now. Absolutely. I'm glad you said that, man.
what the like help me understand depersonalization.
So there's a tendency when people get stressed out or when they're in certain like new circumstances to sort of personalize the things that are happening. They view it, and I'm going to say the word egocentric, and people think that that's a bad thing when I say that. I don't mean it as a bad thing, but people view it from like this egocentric thing that it must be something that I did, that this is like it's sort of an over magnification of the personal influence in a given moment, especially if you feel a sense of like lack of influence in the outside of environment. You're going to overdo it and overcompensate with like looking at things as being like your fault, or being, cutting deeper than they really are. And so really looking at a lot of what's happening right now and the decisions people are making, boundaries they're setting, uh, conversations you're having, things that people are sharing, whatever it might be, and sort of trying to depersonalize that as best you can and say, like, I really appreciate this person is telling me these things. This isn't about me as a person necessarily. Like if this person's saying, "Hey, I need some space from you," it's not because I'm some asshole. It might just be because this person just needs some extra space. It has nothing to do with me. Really important to do those things, especially right now where you have more time to think about how things are affecting you specifically.
That makes me think of just, I mean, particularly when talking to high schoolers and stuff, where they're concerned about people's perceptions of them and people's, what they do,
Yeah.
and the reality is people aren't thinking about you as much. They're thinking about them, and
No.
you're thinking about you, and that's fine. It's not that you're not cared or loved or anything like that, but they've got their own shit to handle, and so it's not always about you. And it's really easy to start like, why were they in a bad mood? What did I do? Well, they got someone got their order wrong at
Doesn't
McDonald's
matter.
when they ordered, but it's not about, just let them deal with their what they're feeling, and then come back. And if it's a proper thing, then they'll hopefully communicate with you and you guys can work it out.
I'm gonna get
Um,
deep here for a second.
oh,
So there's actually a phenomenon that helps, if you understand it, can actually help people depersonalize it, and see it from a less egocentric way. Especially if you're an adult, you have more of an ability to do this. Every single person in this, so we have a shared experience here of over 500 people, right? All 500 people that are hanging out in this space, and anybody who's watching the VOD or whatever it is, all has the same level and amount of complexity that led up to this moment in their life. So how think about how complex your life is. Think about all the things that have happened in your life up until this very moment, and every single other person sitting in this space right now had that similar amount of experience and complexity that led up to this moment. Different amounts of time, different quantities, but that complexity is there in every single human being. That can be quite like crazy to really think about when you start if you really spend some time thinking about that. But what that means is that at any given moment, when a person is interacting with you, you are colliding with the entire experience that that person had leading up until that moment. And the chances are that the person's response to you has so little to do with you and so much more to do with the amalgam of their experiences up until this point that you can take some comfort in that. Like, this is maybe like a response to me, but the weight of it has way more to do with what's led them up until this point than it has to do with me. And I think when people overestimate their influence, people overestimate how much people are paying attention to them. And really, you don't need to do that. Here's an example I always give, Zine. Here's something. I'm 30 years old, and I still have acne, still have blackheads all over my face, and I'm very insecure about it. And I really don't like when like people see my zits and when people pay attention to my acne. It really sucks. It's really vulnerable for me. What are you thinking about right now?
How I have acne as well.
Okay. And are you also thinking about my acne and just acne in general?
Yeah,
Would you have ever thought about me being sensitive about my acne had I not brought it up right now in this moment?
no,
Probably not.
probably not.
The thing is, we often create a self-fulfilling prophecy in the things that people notice. Zine had no idea that I'm actually not self-conscious about my acne. It's just an example I give. But I like Zine would have never known that, would have never paid attention to it. If he would have noticed that I had acne, he probably would have just looked at it and been like, oh, well, he's got acne, but whatever. If he was an asshole about it, then Zine's an asshole. I don't want to talk to him if he's going to be a dick about it. But like, he was not thinking about it at all until I just brought it up. And people do this all the time. People will throw their vulnerabilities that they're afraid everybody's going to notice on the table and will front it in the hopes that they can take control of it, but don't realize that you just brought the attention on the thing that you are insecure about on your own. And it probably never would have come up if you would have never drawn attention to it.
I'm gonna take
People
that
are,
I'm gonna take that a step further. If I was an
yep,
asshole about it, that would have a lot more to do with the things that have happened in my experience, not
correct,
anything to do with what Dr. Mick has actually done.
correct.
That's talking about me, and I like so. I mean, which is
Yep.
circling back exactly what you were saying of the amalgamation of that person in that experience is what builds them to that, and you had very, very, very little to do with that. So when you meet that guy who's just perpetually an asshole, it just makes you feel like nothing every time they deal with them and you just hate them, understand that that's an expression of them and who they are, not of who you are.
And
um
that means you can set boundaries with that person if you need to. It doesn't excuse their behavior necessarily. If they're being an asshole to you, you can give an explanation for it, but it may call for boundaries if a person's being a dick to you. And that's okay to set those boundaries if you need to.
okay,
Look
we
at that. That was teamwork there, Zine.
way to balance back and forth.
Yeah.
So now we've rolled through almost none of these. We have more questions than when we started with our
I
Q&A.
know.
So we're gonna have to do a couple and then probably just let the rest go. I'm sorry, guys. I don't want to take too much of Ryan's time. I really appreciate you coming out, and people have really enjoyed it, I think.
Oh,
And
I
I've
appreciate all
enjoyed
of
it.
you.
So I'd be totally down to do this again with you sometime if you're down as well. I mean, if
Absolutely.
you want me to be killing you in DBD, we could, but I think that that's
Murder me,
a
baby.
much bigger
No.
distraction. Like we can't really kind of have quite as focused a talk
Yeah.
when we're doing that as well. Um, so
I
just a
will
couple.
say,
Go ahead.
can I just say really quick? I do this on my stream a lot, and I feel
Yeah, of
compelled to do
course.
it right now, which is like I just want to say to echo Zine, I am really grateful for everybody that's here and that is hanging out and is willing to listen and engage in this discussion. And I mean, I am watching chat while we're talking, and like just the support and kindness and like curiosity that's happening in chat and stuff. Like is really incredible, like what you've created, Zine, in terms of your community here. And I love to see some of my people in here too, although
Yeah.
they've pretty much cross-pollinated at this point. But I just want to extend my appreciation to everybody for letting me come on and spending your time here and hanging out with us and asking such wonderful questions. Like I hope none of you feel taken for granted as viewers, because like I really, and I know you do too, Zine, I really appreciate you guys. So
Yes.
thanks for giving us a platform to talk about this stuff.
Thank you, guys. Just one or two more, and then we'll wrap up. Since all this happened and school's being closed, I've noticed about myself is that I seem to be easily set off when my kids are just playing and asking questions. I feel like shit every time I snap at them just for a little question. That keeping in mind, Panda, your everyone's baseline of, we all have that temperament boil over stage. We can take so much shit, and then at that last point, then it's just, fuck this, fuck you, fuck them, fuck everything, right? And all this is taking occupying the majority of that,
Mhm.
as I spit, the majority of that buffer that you have, that allowance. To handle things, and that's why it's so easy to get tipped off. Now, I don't know
Yeah.
if there's ways to mitigate that Dr. Mick might add in. Whatever, we'll just pretend like that was language. Might add to that, but understand that it's perfectly normal for people to, and that's what kind of what we're talking about is just when they say temperaments are running high. What they're saying is we're so emotionally full of dealing with stress and everything else that we just don't have the bandwidth to really be able to handle and be patient. I think patience is what we lose, one of the first things, because the patience is the amount of capacity you can do to put up with bullshit before you have that boil over point. So loss of patience is completely understandable in this, and allow yourself to understand that that's going to be a normal response. Obviously, you want to try and minimize what how much you pass that on to the kids and stuff like that, but don't you mentioned, you feel like shit for that. Give yourself that allowance to understand that it's okay for you to be stressed. It's okay for you to not be at your best right now, because none of us are, and that's a perfectly valid feeling or
You know what's
state.
beautiful about what you just did, Zine? Do you even know you did this?
I have no idea.
It's wonderful. So you literally just took accommodation, which is what I was talking about earlier about changing a person's expectations, and you just put it into a nutshell in the answer to that question. You're basically like, we are all being forced to reevaluate our expectations of ourselves right now. And so, if you sit and you get annoyed by your kids, first of all, people hate when I say this. I'm going to say it anyway. Kids can be really freaking annoying.
Oh, hell
Kids
yeah.
can be kids are really basic. There's not a lot of complexity to the things that they say. They speak in very basic general terms. They bitch about stuff that they really have no reason bitching about except for the fact that they're kids, and that's absolutely what they should be bitching about when they're kids. What's happening is there's a change of expectation. Maybe I'm a person who may get annoyed with my kids right now because there's a lot going on in the world. Maybe I'm a person who struggles actually with the idea that I'm being told and forced to be sitting inside. Like, we're all being forced in some ways to change the expectations we have of ourselves. And you can either resist that or you can embrace that as something that might add complexity to your understanding of yourself and your environment and the world around you. And I would recommend you go with the latter because it's going to make some of those experiences a little bit easier. And if you can expect that of like, hey, I may be set off, may, not will, may be set off when my kids are annoying. How do I want to respond if that annoyance happens? Instead of me getting all up in my head about how I shouldn't be annoyed with my kids, let me just say, okay, I'm annoyed. What do I want to do? Right? Like, how do I want to respond despite the fact that I'm annoyed?
All right.
Really important distinction to make.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have anything to add to that other than, it's like I can relate to this with a story, and I was like, you know what? That stands on its own. I didn't, but I dealt with depression all my life and dealt with suicidal ideation throughout all that, and the only time I took it serious was when I lost a friend to suicide and realized that I was heading down that same road. I still struggle, but going to therapy has helped so much. What sucks is my insurance changed, and so I no longer have insurance for therapy, but I still use the coping mechanisms that my therapist taught me. I am really struggling during this time, though, I noticed. Um, Dutchy Cat, it makes sense that, again, not to just repeatedly validate, but understandably, it makes sense that
Yep.
that you're struggling, that there's a lot going on, and it's tough, and all of these feelings, especially where you've lost, you have the coping mechanisms that your therapist has given you, but your therapist was also a coping mechanism. It was a feeling that you could you look forward to, and tell yourself, at least I've got that, and that'll help, and in a way, it's like that idea that it will help is almost self-fulfilling, and carries something there. So, but also keep in mind, Dr. Mick, have talked about, I can't remember the exact term, but sliding scale or pay on a scale or charge
Hmm.
on a scale. There's different things that
Sliding
therapists
scale.
sliding
Yep.
scale will do to try and accommodate those of you who are in a financially difficult position but still can use the therapy. So it might be that you say, I can't afford to go regularly, but there's a lot going on right now, so maybe a session right now would be worth that value to you. I mean, I don't obviously I don't know all the factors to your finances or anything like that, but that's something to consider is maybe it's not a regular thing, and maybe it is out of pocket, and you talk to them, and you're like, "Hey, I need this. Hey, what can we do?" And hopefully they'll work with you on that. But yeah, being in control, like, I mean, you kind of talked about how you have it mostly handled, so I don't know that we need to go into the suicidal ideation and stuff like that. But really, I lost my brother to suicide, and even having dealt with that, suicidal ideation was something that I really struggled with my depression, and so it doesn't, solve it, but it does give you a basis of this is the impact that it can have on others, which really was very helpful for me. Um, but yeah, I do you have any thoughts that really kind of jump to mind of where to go with that?
Yeah. I mean, I for those who don't know, I worked on a suicide hotline for 3 years when I was in my undergrad, and I did overnight shifts over the course of those 3 years, where I'd go midnight to 8 AM talking to people on the phone. So the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline routed to me if you were in the area, and
Wow,
I would be the one that answered the phone. And there were times where I had to juggle calls
there's
and all
some
those sorts of things.
pretty
It was
heavy stories from that. You
pretty
can't
heavy.
tell, I'm assuming.
I mean, I can just in a
Oh,
very like basic sense,
right.
but um, reason I mention that is one of the things that and this is speaking to really everybody in chat, not just the person that answered, is like suicidal ideation a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times is a route that people take cognitively when they're experiencing an overwhelming sense of hopelessness and often want it to end. And they feel like they don't have any other options other than to end their life because if I don't have life, I don't have to feel this sense of overwhelming hopelessness.
Exhaustion.
Um, One of the main buffers for preventing people from um, acting on their suicidal ideation is to get them in contact with another human being. And so the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is goes 24/7. And so you don't have to be actively suicidal to call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. It also works as a crisis line. And so if you're a person who really is in a space where you cannot afford therapy right now, even on a sliding scale, if there's not a lot of therapists that are available in your area, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is always there. And now they may have to triage a bit if there's a low amount of volunteers in the call center and they have somebody who's maybe like actively, potentially life threatening situation. You may be have to be juggled, um, but they will at the very least provide some human contact and will serve as like a sounding board to be able to empathize with you and maybe help do a little bit of some minor problem solving, help you re-engage with some of the coping mechanisms that you've used in the past. And so that is a really valuable resource that I recommend everybody use. When you call and they answer, all you're going to hear on the other side when they answer the line is just either hello crisis center or National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and then they'll let you talk and you just go and you say what you need to say and they are trained to handle that. It's a pretty intense training that you go through to do that. The other thing I will say for those who don't know this is right now, because of the COVID-19 thing, a lot of insurance companies are actually laxing their requirements on whether they are willing to reimburse teletherapy, which means that you may actually have access to teletherapy now through your insurer that you might not have had access to prior. Which means if you live in a state like, say, Illinois, and you live in the boonies in central Illinois, Chicago is oversaturated with therapists. So is New York City. So is, like Los Angeles, all these sorts of areas with big cities. You could see a therapist in Chicago through teletherapy living 4 hours away in central Illinois because the license covers the state. So teletherapy has become increasingly an option, and I recommend that you go to a place like Psychology Today to see who is offering teletherapy and if they're doing it on a sliding scale. And that you may have more access than you realize right now. And I really want to make sure everybody in here knows that.
Uh, two final things there. One is someone mentioned that they lost their mom, going to grief counselor until the state shut down the doctor's office and were not essential to the virus. Not sure what to do until she can start. Your therapist can start doing phone based appointments. Your therapist should be pretty responsive. Like, I mean, they by this point I would expect them to. If they haven't, then I'd almost be asking what you should be in contact with a therapist saying I need therapy or I need this conversation. What are my options? Do you have a referral? Is it, if you're not getting set up, then where should I be going? Because you need to pursue your health. But most of the therapists, I assume, have through this have moved to a model where their teletherapy is pretty common. In fact, you're entirely home based at this point, aren't you, Ryan?
My entire caseload is converted to being online right now. So,
Right.
and now, granted, I had some clients that said, "I'm cool. I'll wait until you're back in person,"
Sure.
and that's totally their prerogative. Your therapist absolutely should not ghost you right now. So
they
that's actually an ethical violation for a therapist to ghost you. So,
I I'm assuming there's more context than what we were
probably.
given that with that, but yeah.
B but yeah, like, your therapist absolutely should be communicating with you if there are changes to their practice. They are ethically responsible to do that. So just so you know, keep following up. And yeah, I mean, I have my rule of thumb is to respond within 48 hours. I tell all my clients if I don't for whatever reason, please follow up with me and like drive me crazy because I will respond. But you should never be ghosted by your therapist, especially during times like this.
And then the last thing for me is Ghost Wolf responded during your conversation about the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, saying the hotline didn't stop my brother, and this is a big point for me because it's something that I don't know whether I'm going to say the right things, but that I feel very strongly about. And particularly where myself and some of my moderators, they signed up to not thinking they were going to be helping out with my stream, but the reality is we deal with at-risk people,
Mhm.
and we have been in some pretty hairy situations. But one of the things that I tell them, and this applies for you and the hotline and even to your brother, is that final decision is the person's choice. No one is God in their life except for them. So whether as my moderators talk to people and try and help or whatever, there's not I give them license to understand that they are not responsible for what ultimately happens, and
Yep.
they do the best that they can. They offer what they can. They listen. They talk. They communicate and do everything that they possibly can. But that final decision is each individual's choice, and so it is not the hotline's fault. That there might be some assigned anger there, and that's a whole topic that
Yeah,
I
that's a
I
whole
I
other night.
started half started down that road with in another situation, and Dr. Mick was like, whoa, 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 back the fuck off that one. You don't want any of that. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
But understand that that choice ultimately is the person's choice,
yes.
and there's nothing that the hotline or I mean, you can always say, well, they might have said something, they might have done something different, but the
Probably
person
not.
made that choice, and they might have made that choice before they even called the hotline or whatever. Just understand that if you deal with someone who ends up engaging in self-harm, that is ultimately their choice to do that to themselves. And like, no matter what, no one's ever going to make them do that, and otherwise
Yep.
that's called murder. So it's a different thing. But I have a very strong passionate response to that. Just by the way you phrased it was almost accusing. But even if not, like, don't think just because it didn't work for one person that it might not help another, because everybody gets into those situations in their own different way, that their entire life's focus and amalgamation of their experiences have taken them to that point. There's really only so much they can do, and you can't save everyone, unfortunately.
Suicide is rarely impulsive, and it is when people call a hotline, they are generally doing so out of some degree of ambivalence. But everything you just said, Zine, is 100% true, and that's a lot of times very hard for people to. I mean, obviously, is really hard for people to wrap their minds around sometimes because it's a form of complex unresolved grief. You don't get to ask the person. You don't get to get closure from that person. So people fill in the gaps and they look for all those types of things. So it's hard because the you know the hotline, not to overly belabor this, but the hotline is there to help when people are experiencing a level of ambivalence and when they are at that point where it just seems like the option they want to go with because they feel like they've exhausted their other options but they don't actually want to do it. When I was on the crisis line, It had been around for 33 years, and not one time over the 33 years had anybody ever killed themselves over the phone. And I talked to, had to have been hundreds of people who were on various levels of the scale of whether it was fleeting suicidal ideation to, I had one night where I had a person where I could literally hear them clicking the gun over the phone, um, and loading it. And none of those people ever ended up doing it. Now, what happened afterwards, after the phone call, I had to get emergency service involved in certain circumstances, but I'm not, as a hotline worker, and this was something that really was part of the training and what you learn as a therapist as well. And this is alludes again, this is to give some like more weight to what Zine said, because everything Zine said is true, is I'm not ultimately responsible for the choice that somebody makes after they get off of the hotline. And I'm not ultimately responsible for the choices that my clients make over the course of a week when they're not with me. And that's a hard step for a person to take in the volunteer role of that, but it's also hard for a lot of people to really wrap their minds around, because it's a level of accountability that most people don't want to hold people to, because it's a very deep and tough thing to do. And um, we were always told, like, hey, you know what, at the very least, at the very baseline, you kept that person alive for the amount of time they were on the phone with you.
Right.
It was that much longer that they were with you. But it's hard. I mean, this stuff is kind of, I mean, you
Yeah.
and I, we could have a whole night just talking about this type of thing, but it's a very, very, very complex issue, but
It
it's one that's
feels
important to
it
talk about.
feels very callous to listen to be like, you need to hold yourself apart from that, and if that's what they're gonna do, that's what they're gonna do. But again, that almost ties back to the egocentric level of, it's not what you're doing right then that's made them decide to be in the place that they're in, and you're doing everything you can to help them, ideally,
Yep.
and but their choice is their choice, and so, like you said, most people, if they're going to the point where they're calling the hotline, they're seeking help. They're looking, they're
Yes.
out of answers from themselves, but they're still seeking and wanting. There's a whole other line, or level, which is they've made their decision and they're not no longer, they've truly given up. And the only thing that you can say is that you can't assign your own responsibility there, because it's
Yep.
their choice. They had that agency and they made that decision, because there are always, and I want to be clear to everybody who is suffering, or dealing with this, there are always options. It's
Yes.
the I'm out of options, there's nowhere to go, there's nothing else to do. That's the whether it's the depression, whether it's the situation, whether it's acute, whether it's chronic, that those are the lies that you're telling yourself to put yourself further into that situation. And so, just understand, there of course there's hope. We've been through so much as a species, so much as a person. You're a badass for making it this far, as you have in life already.
Yep.
So you can do whatever's next, and no matter how scary it might seem. So
Yep.
thank you so
Reaching out for
much.
help is a good thing to do.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me, man. And I really feel like, and
Dude, it
hope
was
that
an honor.
everybody out there in chat, where that you at least were entertained, if not informed and educated. And hopefully I'm not saying all the wrong things. It's always been my concern, because
No, dude. You do, I've told you both behind the scenes, and I'm happy to say it openly right now
please
that, like,
validate me.
yeah, man, like, no, you do wonderful. The people that are in your community and people who have found you speak very highly of you, and you have clearly had a huge impact on the people that you have interacted with over these years of being a streamer, and it shows. And I think a lot of the reason why you have such a positive impact is because you are so mindful about the things that you say, about talking about your experiences, being real,
Okay,
and
stop.
like, and doing your best. Oh, oh, oh. You good? You gonna
Yeah.
need another one?
No,
Okay, all
I
right.
still got this one.
No, yeah, but seriously, dude, like, and so I appreciate you a lot, and I know that all of these people appreciate you, and it's an honor for me to show up here. I mean, I know I've got like credentials and all this fun stuff, but like, you didn't have to bring me on, so thank you for bringing me on. And you've got a wonderful group of people, and they speak. I people, and when they come into my chat, whether it's post rate or whether they're like, watching me now because you introduced them to me. People, anytime I bring you up, people are like, "Oh my god, I love Zine so much." And so you are doing a really wonderful thing with the way that you handle this stuff, and I admire it and respect it. And if I didn't, I wouldn't have shown up tonight. So,
Well, thank you.
you, yeah, you do wonderful things for a lot of people, and that is, and yeah, I don't know. I hope you really take in all the adoration you get from the people that are
Oh, I
in your
do.
chat and
My
watch.
ego's the size of New York,
Good,
so it
good,
but
good.
thank you so much, man.
But it
And
was an honor to
yeah,
show up, and I
well,
appreciate you inviting me on. It was awesome.
I'd love to have you on again sometime. I could just like, I mean, I've told you before, I could just chat for hours with you. Like
Hell yeah,
I
man.
just love picking the brains and stuff. But it's late, guys. Let's let the poor man sleep. He's got work tomorrow. Thank you so much. Be sure to follow him, twitter.com/DrMickLive, youtube.com/c/DrMickLive, and twitch.tv/DrMickLive. And don't worry, his name is not actually Mick, it's Ryan.
It's Ryan. Yeah, Mick
But
is not in my name in any place.
he can't be your therapist, but he will be your friend and he will help you out in many ways. So if you want to see bad gameplay and great conversation, then go check out my friend. Sorry, I like to rib you, but he does fine. He plays a game where he's like
I do my
he
best.
just absorbs bullets. I don't understand like the game. I'm like people don't get
The
shot like
divisions is
people
the
people
divisions
don't
is
get
shit
shot
show
like
right
that and
now.
just be like like that doesn't make sense. But
I
it's fine.
know.
If you want to talk monsters, okay, then at least it's a fantastical setting. But give me an army show or an army setting where the guy takes like 50 shots from an AK, which I didn't
know, it
realize
doesn't
you don't
make
have to
any
reload
sense.
it except for anyway, it's fine. Thank you so much, man. Have yourself a nice night, and
You too, dude.
we'll chat. So talk to you later, man.
All right, man.
Bye
Take
bye.
care. Bye, chat.